The recovery pod's floodlight found the boy before the sensors did. And Officer Toole would remember that order all her life, the eye before the machine, the seeing before the knowing. He was standing in the open. That was the first wrong thing. A world-tagged red tier, catalog Osvaren, a place where the Concord's own survey drones burned out inside a season, and there was a soft-skinned bipedal survivor standing upright in the ashwind with his arms loose at his sides as if he were waiting for a transit shuttle. He was not running. Nothing on a red tier world stood still in the open unless it was already dead, and this one was breathing. Toole could see the fog of it, leaving his mouth in the pod's light. "Get low," she said into the channel, though he could not hear her. Get low, why are you not low?" Her co-recovery, an Osk named Presh, had the winch already spooling. 12 seconds to the ground, fauna sweep. The fauna sweep came back and Toole's throat closed. Not because it was full, because it was empty. Nothing on the thermal, nothing on the motion grid, in a 100-meter ring around a lone, warm body on a world that ate survey teams, and that was more frightening than a swarm, because it meant something had already cleared the ring, and cleared it recently, and was not on the grid because it did not want to be. "Down," Presh said. "We're down, get him and go." Toole went out the hatch into a wind that smelled of iron and cold rot, and something underneath both that her translator would later render, uselessly, as home. The boy turned his head toward her without hurry. His face was burned brown by a sun that was not his, cracked at the lips, and his eyes were the calm, flat eyes of someone who had stopped expecting rescue so long ago that its arrival did not move him. He was wrapped in hides that were not manufactured. He had made them. He had made them from things he had killed, or from things that had been killed for him. "You're a person," Toole said, and her translator carried it and the boy's mouth moved. "You need to wait," he said. His voice came out cracked and slow, a voice used more for other purposes than talking. "He's on the ridge. He'll come when I call. You have to wait for him." "There's no one on the ridge." Presh had come out behind her, sidearm up, sweeping the dark. "The sweep's clean. Officer, the sweep is clean. We are exposed. We do not wait." "Not a person," the boy said. He said it patiently, the way a man corrects a child who has confused two simple words. "He's not on the sweep because he doesn't want to be. Whistle him in and he'll come. Just give me a second. Just." He lifted 2 fingers to his mouth. Later, in the report, Toole would write that the survivor attempted to signal an imagined companion, and that the recovery team made the field decision to extract immediately under threat conditions. That was true. It was also nothing like what happened, and she knew it while she was writing it. What happened was that the boy whistled, a short rising note, 2 of them, a sound so small the wind should have swallowed it, and something on the ridge answered. It was not a roar. Toole had heard the war beasts of 6 species roar, and this was the opposite of that. This was a low single note that she felt in the plates of her chest before she heard it in her ears, a sound with no threat in it at all, which was exactly why every part of her body that had survived 400 million years of being prey told her to get off the ground and into the sky and never come back. Presh made a noise she had never heard an Osk make. The floodlight swung to the ridge on its own gimbal, tracking the sound, and found nothing, because whatever had made it had already left the ridge. "There," the boy said, please, turning to point. "See, he's calm." "Now," Presh said, and grabbed him. Afterward, Toole would defend Presh, because Presh had done exactly what the manual said, and the manual had kept both of them alive across 900 recoveries. You do not wait on a red tier world. You do not wait for a survivor's hallucination. You take the warm body and you go. Presh took the warm body. The boy was starved down to rope and bone, and he still nearly broke Presh's grip, twisting back toward the ridge, and the sound he made was not fear for himself. No, he'll follow the pod. He can't follow the pod. You'll leave him. Don't leave him. He's coming. He's coming." The winch took them up. The hatch sealed on the boy's voice. Through the closing gap, Toole looked down at the ash and the wind and the ring of empty ground, and for 1/2 second, In the last blade of floodlight before the door met the frame, she saw the grass at the base of the ridge move against the wind. Then the door was shut and they were climbing, and the boy had gone limp in Precious' arms. Not fainted, just done. The way a rope goes slack when you finally stop pulling. And he said one more thing before the medical foam took him under. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, to no one, to all of them. "He doesn't leave me, you'll see, he doesn't leave." The Concord kept its recovered persons at HFY, a reception station folded into the light side of a gas moon, so that its long habitat rings were never out of the sun. Someone in the founding architecture had decided, 3 centuries earlier, that people pulled off dying worlds should wake to brightness, and so HFY had no true night. The ward domes ran on real filtered starlight, gold and enormous, falling through 40 meters of clear canopy onto recovery gardens, where survivors of 100 catastrophes learned how to be people again in a place that could not go dark. Adjudicator HFY Vaughn found the light excessive. She was ulnavi, tall and narrow and carefully jointed, her chitin the polished gray of a thing that had never once been in a hurry, and she preferred the diagnostic suites on the inner ring where the light could be dialed down to something a mind could think in. She read the human's file there, in the dim, with the calm of a woman who had read 4,000 such files and had never yet been surprised by one. Survivor, single. Origin, human, colonial stock tender vessel designation Halloway, lost with all hands but one on catalog world Osvaren. Duration of isolation, indeterminate. Skeletal and dental analysis suggested between 14 and 19 local years, which the human's own account did not support and which Vaughn therefore set aside. Physical condition on recovery, catastrophic, and yet, she noted the yet not fatal, not even close to fatal. A human should not survive 19 days on Osvaren. This one had survived something between 14 and 19 years, and had walked out to the recovery pod on his own legs. And the only part of the file that concerned Adjudicator Vaughn was the last part. The subject presents a fixed and elaborate delusion of a surviving companion. She read the recovery officer's supplementary note twice. Officer Toole had written more than protocol required. Officers who wrote more than protocol required were, in Vaughn's long experience, officers who had felt something they did not have a category for, and were trying to make the feeling into an official object so that someone above them would take it and file it and make it stop being theirs. Vaughn had a category for that too. She dialed the light down another notch and opened the interview. They had put Eli Marsh in a garden. He sat on the edge of a planter with his hands open on his knees and looked up through the gold canopy at the enormous soft-edged sun that never moved. And he did not look like a man who had been broken by a red-tier world. He looked like a man waiting on a porch. His hair had been cut and his burns treated, and they had put him in the soft gray recovery clothes that fit no species well. And under the clothes, his arms were still roped with the muscle of a body that had carried and hauled and killed to stay alive. And he sat with the specific stillness of a person who has learned that stillness is a survival trait. Adjudicator Vaughn sat across from him at the correct clinical distance and folded her long hands and began, in the tone she used for the fragile, the tone that had soothed the survivors of collapses and plagues and slow orbital deaths. "Eli, my name is HFY Vaughn. I am an adjudicator of recovered persons, which means my work is to help you come the rest of the way home. You have done the hardest part already. You lived. Now the only thing left is the part inside." She let that settle. "Will you talk to me about the ridge?" "You want to talk about Boone," Eli said. "Is that the name you gave him?" "It's his name." He said it without heat. "It was his name before the ship went down. He came aboard with the working stock. He's not something I made up out there, if that's where you're going. I know that's where you're going. Your officer thinks I dreamed him. You think I dreamed him." He looked at her with those flat, calm eyes. "I understand why. I'd think the same thing. But you're wrong, and it's going to matter that you're wrong, so I'll tell you as many times as you want." Vaughn made a note. Insight intact, delusion nonetheless fixed. That combination was the difficult one. A survivor who could see the shape of his own condition from the outside, describe it, predict her diagnosis of it, and remain entirely inside it. That was not a man you talked out of anything. That was a man whose delusion had become load-bearing, had grown down into the place where the will to live was kept, so that to take the delusion away might take the survivor with it. She had lost people that way. She would not lose this one. She adjusted her approach. "Tell me about him then," she said. "Tell me about Boone." And the boy told her, and this was the part that Vaughn had not been prepared for after all, because he did not describe a monster. She had interviewed 100 survivors with companion delusions, and every one of them had built a guardian to match their terror. A thing enormous and armored and endlessly violent. A fantasy strong enough to have kept them safe, because the mind that invents a protector invents one equal to the danger. This boy described a dog. He described the exact weight of it lying across his legs on the cold nights, and how it ran hot, hotter than a person, so that in the killing cold of the long dark season the animal had been the only warmth on the whole ruined world. He described the color of it, a dirty cream gone gray with ash, and the black mask over its face, and one torn ear. He described the way it ate last and slept lightest. He described teaching it nothing, because it had come already knowing its work, a work older than the ship or the colony, or the two species now sitting in a garden failing to understand each other. The work of standing between a soft thing it had decided to love and everything in the dark that wanted the soft thing dead. On the third night, Eli said, the crawlers came up out of the ash for the bodies. You know the ones. Your catalog calls them something with numbers. We called them crawlers. He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the middle distance where the memory was. I had a cutting bar and a hull plate, and I thought I was going to die on the third night. And Boone put me at his back against the wreck, and he told me to be still, not with words, he doesn't have words, he told me with his body. He leaned his whole weight back into me, and I understood be still. And then he went out into the dark, and I was still. He came back from the middle distance and looked at her. In the morning there were no crawlers. There were parts of crawlers. And Boone came back, and he was hurt, and he lay down across my legs and went asleep, because his part was done, and now it was my job to keep watch while he healed. That was the arrangement. That was every day he stopped. For a long time. That's not a delusion adjudicator. A delusion doesn't wake you up to take a watch. Vaughn wrote nothing for a moment. Then she wrote, subject has constructed a reciprocal caretaking narrative. The delusion assigns him duties, which reinforces it and provides post-traumatic structure. Do not challenge frontally. That is a beautiful account, she said, and meant it, which was the trap of her profession, that the beautiful accounts were the most dangerous, because they were the hardest to let go. I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear that I ask it with respect. The recovery team performed a full-spectrum sweep of the ground around you before extraction. Thermal, motion, mass, scent. Officer Toole is very good and her equipment is very good. There was nothing there, Eli. There was no animal. The ridge was empty. He wasn't on the sweep, Eli said, because he didn't want to be on the sweep. An animal cannot choose to be invisible to a scent grid. He can choose to be downwind of it. He can choose to be under it, in the ash, breathing slow. He can choose to move only when the beam swings away, because he's watched the beam swing for a long time and he knows its rhythm. Eli leaned forward, and for the first time there was something under the calm, not anger, something more patient and more frightening than anger. You keep saying he like it's a machine you're trying to catch. He's not a machine. He's better than a machine at the one thing he does, and the one thing he does is not be seen until he wants to be seen. Your officer's grid didn't fail. Boone beat it. That's what he is. That's what he's for. And where is he now? Coming, Eli said. He was downridge killing the thing that would have killed me while you were putting me on the winch. By the time he got back, you were gone. So now he's coming. He said it as simple fact, the way a man says the tide is coming. a thing requiring no belief because it was already in motion. I don't know how long it'll take him. He's never had to follow me off a planet before. But you took me up in a machine that left a trail he can read, and he'll read it and he'll come. And when he gets here, you're going to feel very foolish about this garden." He looked around the gold and green and the endless kind light. "It's nice, though. I'll give you the garden." Adjudicator Vaughn closed the interview and went back to the dim inner ring and did the thing her office existed to do. She wrote the finding. Subject Eli Marsh, human, sole survivor of the Halloway loss, presents an isolate companion fabrication of unusual coherence and stability. The fabrication is load-bearing and integrated with the survival narrative. Frontal challenge is contraindicated and may precipitate collapse. The subject is not a danger to himself. He is calm, oriented, cooperative in all matters but one. But the one matter is not small. He believes, with total conviction, that a large predatory animal from a red-tier world is currently traveling across settled space to reach him, and he will act on that belief. He will refuse transit that leaves it behind. He will wait for it. He may attempt to keep quarters and systems accessible to it. A recovered person who structures his life around welcoming an apex predator that does not exist cannot be certified for onward placement. And a recovered person who cannot be certified for onward placement remains, indefinitely, the responsibility of this directorate. She recommended continued observation, a graduated program to loosen the fabrication, and she paused a long time over this line, because she was not a cruel woman and the line was, she knew, the beginning of a cruelty even when it was correct. She recommended that in the interim, for the subject's stability, station personnel neither confirm nor deny the animal, and that all reports of anomalous fauna aboard Havery be routed to her office directly and kept off the general log, so that the fabrication would find nothing to feed on. She filed it, she dimmed the light. She did not yet know that she had just written the instruction that would, over the next 11 days, quietly assemble every piece of the evidence against her own finding, and route it all, personally, to her desk, where she alone would watch it grow. Officer Toole did not go home when her recovery rotation ended. She went to the records annex on the outer ring and sat in a booth and watched the extraction footage 40 times. Presh found her there on the second evening. Osk did not knock. Presh simply folded down onto the bench beside her and looked at the same frozen image she had frozen, the ash, the ridge, the boy's arm coming up to point at nothing. "You're going to get flagged," Presh said. "Adjudicator's office pulled this file under a restriction. You watching it 40 times leaves 40 marks." "I know." "Then stop watching it." "There's a moment," Toole said, "at the very end, when the door's closing, watch the grass." Presh watched the grass. Toole watched Presh watch it. She saw the exact instant the other Osk's throat sac tightened, the small involuntary thing that Osk bodies did when they saw a predator they had not known was there. "Wind," Presh said, after a while without conviction. The wind was coming the other way. The whole scene, the ash blows left to right. Watch the grass again. It moves right to left. Something low, moving against the wind, keeping the wreck between itself and our light, right at the moment the boy said it was coming. Toole let the clip run to black. "I filed it as extraction under threat conditions. I stand by that. But I want you to say it out loud, Presh, just once in this booth where it doesn't go on any record. Was the ridge empty?" Presh was quiet for a long time. "No," Presh said, "the ridge was not empty." On the fourth day, a kitchen steward on the ward ring reported a loss. It was a small loss, and it went in the small loss log, which was where thefts of protein went, because on a station full of recovered persons from 100 hungry worlds, protein sometimes walked. 9 kilos of raw stock protein, the frozen slabs kept for the carnivore species, gone from a sealed cold locker between one inventory and the next. The seal was not broken. The lock was not forced. The vent grill above the locker was bent outward. From the inside, which no one could explain, and so no one tried to. And the loss was logged, and the grill was replaced, and the matter would have ended there. Except that the wardering loss log rooted, now, by a new standing order, directly and privately to the office of adjudicator HFY. She read it in the dim. 9 kilos of raw carnivore stock from the ring where the human was housed, through a vent a person could not fit through and an animal was not supposed to be able to reach. She sat with it. Then she did the disciplined thing, the correct thing, the thing that was, she would think later, the first mistake dressed as prudence. She did not put it in the general log. She did not raise it. The finding said feed the fabrication nothing, and a station-wide alert about a phantom animal raiding the lockers would have been a feast. So she filed the loss, quietly, in the folder she had started, the folder that had 1 page in it and now had 2. And she told herself that a hungry, recovered person with a working knowledge of ventilation systems was a far more likely explanation than the alternative, and that the alternative was, in any case, categorically impossible. The boy had been in a monitored garden the whole night. She checked. She told herself she was checking to rule out his involvement. She was not certain afterward that this was why she checked. They let Eli Marsh walk the ward ring in the afternoons, escorted, because a recovered person needed to move and the ring was safe. He walked it the way he did everything, without hurry, cataloging exits and cover and sightlines out of a habit. No garden was going to unteach him. And on the 5th afternoon, he stopped at the great curved window where the ring looked out over the recovery gardens 2 levels down, and he watched something the aliens had not thought to hide from him. Down in the largest garden, a Draben warden named Call was working the station's guardian. The Concord did not call it a war beast officially. Officially, it was a sanctioned deterrent organism, a Varick, and Havery kept one because a station full of traumatized Apex World survivors occasionally produced a crisis that required something with more authority than a stun lattice and less politics than armed officers. The Varick was the size of a transit sled. It ran on 6 legs, and it was armored in overlapping plates the dull red of old blood, and it had killed, in its service life, 11 things that needed killing, and the Draben who handled it loved it the way you love something that will die for you, and the whole station gave the garden it exercised in a wide and instinctive berth. Eli watched Call run the Varick through its work, and his escort watched Eli, and later the escort filed the small report that the adjudicator's standing order had asked for, and this was the 3rd page in the folder. The report said the human observed the Varick exercise for some time and appeared calm. It said that when the Varick, at the end of its routine, turned toward the ward window, turned its blunt armored head up and back over its own shoulder toward the high glass where the human stood, and went still, the human did not react with fear. The report said, in the flat language of a low-ranking officer trying to describe a thing above his pay, that the human raised one hand to the glass, not waving, just laying his palm flat against it, and said a single word that the escort's translator caught and rendered. Soon. And that the Varick, 40 meters below, held its head turned toward the glass for the length of 9 of the warden's increasingly nervous commands before it consented to look away. Warden Call filed his own report, which did not route to the adjudicator, because Call did not know about the standing order. Call's report went to station security and said only that his animal had shown anomalous fixation behavior and elevated stress markers for the 3rd consecutive day, and that he wanted the ring's sensor logs pulled to find the stimulus. Security told Call the logs were clean. Call, who had spent 19 years learning to read one animal, told security that his animal was reading something their logs could not, and that when a Varick got quiet instead of loud, quiet was worse, and that they should find out what was making an 11-kill deterrent organism decide it was no longer the biggest thing on the station. Security filed Call's concern for review. The review was scheduled for the following week. It did not survive the following week. Adjudicator Vaughn brought the boy a chess set on the 6th day. It was not chess. It was a conquered strategy game, Kesh, that Vaughn had found useful across many years of interviews, because you learned more about a mind from an hour of watching it play than from a day of watching it talk. She set the carved pieces out in the garden and explained the rules, and the boy listened and nodded and lost the first 4 games badly, and something in the losing eased her, because a mind losing at Kesh was a mind she understood. In the 5th game he stopped losing. He did not start winning exactly. He started doing something Vaughn had never seen a novice do, and had rarely seen a master do, which was to stop trying to win and start trying to make her spend. Every exchange he offered cost her more than it cost him, not in pieces but in position, in the slow narrowing of where her pieces could safely be. Until she looked up from a board, she was technically winning and understood, with a cold that had nothing to do with the dial-down light, that she had been maneuvered to the edge of the board with all her strength intact and nowhere left to put it. "Where did you learn to play like this?" she asked. "I didn't," he moved a piece. "It's just how you stay alive when the other thing is stronger than you. You don't beat it, you can't beat it. You just make everywhere it wants to go a little more expensive than it wants to pay until it stops wanting to go there." He looked up. "Boone taught me, sort of. Not the game, the idea. You can't outfight the world. You outpatience it. You make yourself the piece it isn't worth taking." "And is that what he is doing now?" Vaughn asked before she had decided to. "Outpatiencing. The distances between settled worlds are not a ridge, Eli. They are not something a hungry animal crosses because it is loyal. Do you understand what you are asking me to believe? Not that you had a companion. I believe you had something out there, real or otherwise, that kept you alive, and I honor it. I am asking whether you understand the size of the thing you are claiming. That an animal followed a shuttle's ion trail across a distance that our own children cannot conceive of, through vacuum, without air, without heat, without a way to know where the trail led. Do you hear how that sounds?" "It sounds insane," Eli agreed. "It sounded insane to me too the whole time you were carrying me up. That's why I stopped fighting your officer. I did the math you're doing. I know what he'd have to survive. Cold he can survive. He survived worse cold than space on Osvaran. That's the thing you don't understand about the world you pulled me off of. It makes space look gentle. Air he can't survive, so he found air. I don't know how. I've stopped needing to know how. I spent 14 years learning that the answer to how did he do that is always the same answer. He does that. That's what he is. You're going to keep asking me to prove he's possible, and I'm going to keep telling you I stopped needing him to be possible a long time ago." He moved his last piece into the one square that ended the game, and it was not a piece she had been watching, because he had spent 6 moves teaching her to watch the others. "He's just real. Possible is your problem. Real is mine." Vaughn looked at the board for a long time. Then she went back to the dim ring and added a 4th page to the folder, and the 4th page was not about the boy. The 4th page was a query she sent, on her own authority, to the station's environmental division, asking, hypothetically, she wrote, for a clinical model, what the minimum survivable transit conditions would be for a large endothermic organism to reach Havre from the general vector of the Holloway recovery, and how many vessels had made that transit in the relevant window, and whether any of them had reported anomalous mass, spoilage, hull noise, or loss of small livestock. She told herself it was diligence. A good adjudicator ruled things out. She was ruling it out. 3 vessels had made the transit. She read the manifests in the dim, one after another, and she was still telling herself she was ruling it out when she reached the 3rd manifest and found the note. The 3rd vessel was a bulk hauler, the Sen Marrow, running fodder grain and frozen stock between the recovery worlds, and it had docked at Havre 2 days before the boys' raid on the locker, and its master had filed a routine anomaly report that had gone nowhere, because it was the kind of report that always went nowhere. Persistent hull noise aft cargo entire transit. Investigated no cause found. On arrival, loss of 4 head of frozen carnivore stock from a sealed hold, seal intact, cause undetermined. Recommend hull inspection at next major port. No injuries, no system faults. Filed for insurance. Vaughn read it 3 times. She was very good at her work, and part of being very good at her work was knowing the exact moment when the thing you were ruling out stopped being the thing you were ruling out, and became the thing you were building a case against your own better judgment to deny. And she felt that moment arrive in the dim of the inner ring, and she sat inside it and did not move. A sealed hold, seal intact, 4 head of frozen stock gone, persistent noise in the aft cargo the whole way from the vector of the world where she had a survivor who was quietly, patiently, without any anger at all, waiting for something to arrive. She was a scientist. She had built the folder to disprove a delusion. And the folder now held 4 pages, and every page pointed the same direction, and the direction was something crossed. Something got into the aft hold of the Sen Marrow at the recovery vector, and ate to stay alive, and kept quiet, and rode a fodder hauler 2 days into port, and got off at Havre, and had been on her station for 6 days, taking 9 kilos of protein through a vent no person could reach, and making an 11-kill war beast go quiet in the garden. She did not file the 5th page. She could not yet decide what the 5th page was. Instead, she sat in the dark and did a thing she had not done in many years, which was to be afraid without a category for the fear. And while she sat there, the boy 2 rings out slept in his monitored garden under a sun that never set. And something moved in the dark spaces of a station that had been built 3 centuries ago by an architect who had promised its frightened sleepers that here, at least, it would never be night. The maintenance tech who saw it first was named Audrey, a young Vesk with new scales and a route through the wardring service ducts that she had walked 200 times without once thinking about the dark. She thought about the dark on the 7th day. Her hand lamp caught it at the end of a horizontal run where the duct opened into a junction plenum, a wide low space where 4 ways met, and the thing was lying in the middle of the plenum in a nest it had made out of insulation batting and the shredded remains of a cold locker's contents, and it was looking at her. That was what she reported over and over in a voice that climbed each time she said it. It was looking at me, not startled, not caught. It had heard her coming for 100 meters and had chosen to still be there when she arrived, lying with its chin on its forepaws, and it watched her come around the corner with an expression that Audrey, who had grown up on a world with its own apex predators and knew exactly what a predator's regard felt like on her skin, described as the worst part. It wasn't hunting me, she said, in the security office, wrapped in a thermal wrap she did not need because the shaking was not cold. That's what I can't. It looked at me and it decided I wasn't anything. It looked at me the way you look at weather, and then it put its head back down. It closed its eyes, with me standing right there. It went back to sleep with me standing right there, because I wasn't worth staying awake for. She pulled the wrap tighter. I have never in my life been so sure I was going to die as when that thing decided I wasn't worth the trouble of it. Security pulled the duct sensors for the plenum. The duct sensors were clean. There was no thermal signature in the plenum, no mass, no motion, across the entire window in which a young tech had stood 2 meters from something and lost the use of her legs. Security began, very quietly, to have the feeling that Warden Call had been having for 4 days, which was the feeling of a hand instruments cannot read, and they did the thing that the standing order had made inevitable. Because the incident had happened on the ward ring, it routed to the adjudicator's office, and the adjudicator's office told security, in a politely worded directive that Vaughn composed herself and hated composing, that the wardring anomalies were connected to a sensitive recovered person's matter, and that all such reports should be consolidated under her authority and kept off the general log pending clinical assessment. Security complied, because adjudicators outrank security in exactly this kind of gray water. And so the second person to stand within arm's reach of the thing in the ducts filed a report that went into Vaughn's folder and nowhere else. and the folder had 5 pages now. And Vaughn sat in the dim and understood that she had built a mechanism that was collecting the proof of her own error and delivering it to her alone, and that every day she did not open the mechanism to the light, she made herself more completely the one person responsible for whatever it was becoming. She went to see the boy. "Something's in the walls," she said. She had decided on the walk out to abandon the technique. The technique was for delusions, and she was no longer certain she was treating one. "Something has been taking food. A tech saw an animal in the service ducts. It matches nothing in our catalog. I am telling you this against every protocol of my office, and I am telling you because I want to watch your face when you hear it. So, something is in the walls of my station, Eli. What is it?" The boy had been sitting in the sun with his eyes closed. He opened them, and Vaughn, who had built a career on reading the small motions of faces across 40 species, watched a thing happen in a human face that she would spend the rest of her life failing to describe to colleagues, because there was no clinical word for it. It was relief, and it was grief, and it was love, and it was the specific, unbearable ease of a person who has been carrying a weight alone for a very long time, and has just felt a second pair of hands take the other end. "He made it," Eli said. His voice was not steady. "He made it across. I told you. I told all of you." He wiped his face with the back of his hand once roughly and got the calm back, but it was a calm laid over something now, a lid on a full pot. "Is he all right? The tech, did anything happen to him? Was he hurt?" "Was the animal hurt?" Vaughn repeated. "A predator is loose in my station, and you ask if it is hurt." "He's not loose." Eli said it gently, correcting her again, the way he had corrected the recovery officer on the ash. "He knows exactly where he is. He knows exactly where I am. He's been keeping the distance because the last time strangers were around me, strangers took me away, and he's not going to make the move until he's sure of the ground. That's why nobody's been hurt. If Boone were loose, adjudicator, you would not have a folder full of sightings. You'd have a folder full of nothing because there'd be nobody left to file. The fact that your tech is alive to be scared is him being careful." He leaned forward. "He's holding position. He's reading your station the way he reads everything, working out the rhythms, the patrols, the sensor sweeps, where the food is, where I am, who the threats are, and who's just furniture. He's doing the thing he did on Osvaren for 14 years before he'd let me sleep. He's making it safe. And when he's done, when he's certain, he'll come to me, and it won't be dramatic, and nobody will get hurt who doesn't reach for me first. That's the whole of it. That's Boone. And if my security decides to hunt him first." The boy's face did not change, but the room around it did, somehow, the temperature of it. "Then you should tell your security not to," Eli said. "Not because he'd lose, because of what winning would cost you and how little he'd even have to try. You have one war beast. I watched it in the garden. It's a good animal, and its warden loves it, and it has killed 11 things." He said the number without contempt, the way you'd note the age of a child. "Boone stopped counting on the 2nd season. Don't put them in a room, not for Boone's sake. He'd be fine." He looked at her steadily. "For yours." Vaughn stood up. Her long joints did not entirely obey her. "You are describing," she said, "an animal that has invaded a conquered station, breached secure holds, evaded every sensor we possess, and terrorized my personnel, and you are describing it as though it were behaving well." "He is behaving well," Eli said. "That's what I keep failing to make you hear. This is Boone behaving well. This is Boone on his very best behavior, being as gentle and as patient and as invisible as a thing like him can be, in a place full of strangers, because he understands he's a guest and he understands I want to stay. You've had a predator from a red-tier world living in your walls for 6 days, and the worst thing that's happened is a frightened tech and some missing meat." He let that sit. "Ask yourself what 6 days of a red-tier predator not on its best behavior would look like. Then maybe you'll start to understand what I've been trying to tell you since the ash. He's not the emergency. He's the thing that decided a long time ago that I don't have to have emergencies anymore. And he crossed space to keep the arrangement." His voice caught again, just slightly, and he let it this time. 14 years. And I thought when the door closed on the winch, I thought that was it. That was the price of getting rescued. I'd traded him for a bed and a sun that doesn't set. And he wouldn't take the trade. He came anyway. So no, adjudicator, I'm not scared of what's in your walls. I'm just— He stopped, and the flat, calm eyes were wet again and unashamed. I'm just really glad he didn't take the trade. Vaughn did not sedate him. She had come out prepared to if his reaction warranted it, and it had warranted the opposite. A delusional man told his delusion was real should decompensate, spiral, weaponize the confirmation. This man had wept with relief and then immediately worried about a stranger's safety, and then immediately warned her, protected her from the consequences of her own security force's pride. There was no diagnostic category in which the danger and the tenderness sat together like that. There was, she was beginning to think, no diagnostic category at all, only a boy and an animal and an arrangement between them older and simpler than any word she had. She went back and she reopened the finding. She sat with her stylus over the recommendation, and she did not know what to write. And while she did not know, the station's directorate, which had its own machinery and did not wait on one adjudicator's uncertainty, moved a lever she had set moving 11 days before and had forgotten she'd set. The certification review. Her original finding, the subject cannot be certified for onward placement while he structures his life around welcoming an apex predator that does not exist, had triggered, per standing procedure, a formal review of the recovered person's disposition. A panel had been convened. A date had been set. The review would determine whether Eli Marsh was to be released to a human resettlement world, retained under observation, or— and this was the outcome the directorate's own logic now pointed toward, because a man who insisted on the reality of a station-wide predator threat and was refusing all transit that left it behind fit the profile precisely, committed to long-term secure care as a danger to the good order of settled space. The review was in 3 days. And the finding on which the whole review rested, the finding that called Boone a fabrication, was Vaughn's with her name on it, filed before she had a folder with 5 pages in it. And she could not simply withdraw it, because to withdraw it now, to stand before a directorate panel and say I was wrong, there is a real red-tier apex predator living in the station walls, and it is here out of loyalty, and it is dangerous, and it is behaving well, was to end her own certification faster than his. She would not be believed. She would be the adjudicator who had caught the delusion. So she did the thing she had spent 11 days not doing. She went to find Officer Toole, because Officer Toole had written more than protocol required, and Vaughn had finally understood why. They met in the records annex, the tall gray adjudicator and the stocky recovery officer, 2 women who had each been sitting alone with the same impossible thing, and had each been certain they were the only one. Toole played her the clip, the grass moving against the wind. She did not editorialize. She had learned in 12 years of recoveries that the strongest thing you could do with a piece of evidence was let it be quiet. Vaughn watched the grass move against the wind, and she opened the folder, and she laid its 5 pages on the table between them under the annex's honest white light, no dimming, no technique, and she said, I have to go into a review in 3 days and testify to a finding I no longer believe. And if I recant it, I destroy my standing and save no one. And if I hold to it, we will commit a sane man to a secure ward for the crime of being right. I have never in 40 years not known which correct thing to do. Tell me what you saw on that ridge, not what you filed. What you saw. And Officer Toole told her about the sound, the single low note that she had felt in the plates of her chest before her ears, the note with no threat in it that had made every prey instinct in her body scream to leave the ground, and about the way the empty sweep had been more frightening than a full one, and about the grass, and about the boy twisting back toward the ridge with a strength a starved body should not have had, saying not don't leave me but don't leave him. And Vaughn listened to all of it with her long hands folded, and when it was done she sat for a while, and then she said the thing that changed the shape of the next 3 days. "Then we are not going to argue that the animal is real," Vaughn said. "We would lose. We are going to make the review need it to be real. We are going to make my station's own evidence. The noise on the hauler, the sealed holds, the terrified tech, the war beast that will not look away from the ward window. Into a case so complete that the only two explanations left standing are that a red-tier predator is aboard, or that the entire station has agreed on a shared delusion." "And then," she said, and something almost like the boy's own dry calm came into her, "we are going to invite it to settle the question itself." Warden Call did not wait for the review. Warden Call had spent 19 years learning that, when his animal told him something, the correct response was to believe the animal and act, and his animal had been telling him the same thing for 6 days. And on the 8th day, Call decided he was going to find out what it was telling him, even if the station's whole clean sensor bureaucracy insisted there was nothing to find. He took the Varick off its exercise routine and put it on a scent track. This was not sanctioned. A sanctioned deterrent organism was to be deployed only on a directorate crisis order, and there was no order, only a warden's certainty and a bent vent grill that maintenance had photographed before replacing. Call had the photograph. He held it to the Varick's blunt nose in the plenum where the tech had frozen, and he watched the great armored head lower, and the plates along its spine lift and settle, and its breath change. And he said the word that in 19 years he had said perhaps 40 times, the word that turned a deterrent into a hunter, and the Varick took the trail. It took the trail for 11 meters. Then it stopped. Call had followed it into the deep service space behind the ward ring, into the crawl runs and the plenums where the light was maintenance amber and the air moved slow, and the Varick stopped at the mouth of a junction it had been about to enter, one forefoot lifted, and it did not put the foot down. Call had never seen it not put a foot down. He waited. The Varick held, 3,000 kilos of sanctioned violence balanced on 5 legs with the 6th raised and motionless, and its head was low and level and pointed into the dark of the junction. And from the dark of the junction came nothing at all, no sound, no shape, no shift in the amber air, and the Varick began slowly to lower itself. Call thought at first that it was crouching to spring. He had the release word ready. He did not use it because the crouch was wrong. The Varick was not gathering. It was flattening. Its belly came down to the deck plate and its head came down between its forelegs and its armored tail, which in 19 years Call had watched lash and hammer and break a charging thing's spine, came in flat along its flank and did not move. It made itself low and wide and still. It looked into the dark and it made itself into a thing that was not a threat, and a small ancient part of Warden Call's own body, the part every plated species carried from the age before it had plates, told him what he was looking at and refused, and told him again. His war beast was submitting. There was something in the junction that his war beast, the largest, most killed with, most feared organism aboard Havery, had taken one look at, or one scent of, or one silent measure of, and had decided, on an instinct below all of Call's 19 years of training, that the correct and only survivable response was to lie down and become small and wait to be permitted to leave. Call did not use the release word. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool, and only a fool asks a question when the answer is already lying flat on the deck in front of him. He backed out of the service space with his hand on the Varick's neck, and the Varick came with him, backward, keeping its lowered head toward the junction until the angle broke, and neither of them turned their back on the dark until there were 2 sealed bulkheads between them and it. In the amber-lit run, with the bulkheads shut, the Varick shook itself all over the way it did after a hard exercise, and leaned its whole armored weight into Call's side, seeking him, and Call stood there and let 3,000 kilos of frightened deterrent lean on him, and understood that whatever was in his station, it was not a thing to be hunted. You did not hunt a thing your hunter lay down for. He went to file the truth, and found the truth had nowhere to go, because the warding incidents all routed to an adjudicator's private folder now. And so Warden Call's account of the day his Varick submitted became the 6th page in Rishka Vaughn's collection. And Vaughn read it in the dim and put her long hand flat on the table and left it there for a while. The 7th page did not come to the folder. The 7th page went up. Prefect Asan Dale was the senior directorate officer aboard Havery, an Ulnavi of Vaughn's own species but a full generation older and a different animal entirely. A man who had risen through the Concord's administration, by understanding that a station's good order was a fragile agreement among frightened people, and that the fastest way to lose it was to admit ever that the administration did not have a category for something. Dale had heard the whispers, a warden's animal spooking, a tech shaking in a thermal wrap, missing stock. Whispers were the beginning of the end of good order, and Prefect Dale dealt with the beginning of the end of good order by finding its source and removing the source. And he had, by the 8th day, identified the source. And the source was a human survivor with a delusion, and apparently a real vermin problem that the whispers had wrapped around the delusion until the two were one rumor. He summoned Vaughn. "There is an animal in my walls," Dale said, in the wide, bright administrative dome where he preferred to work because he found that people conceded faster in the light. "Vermin, off some hauler, some red-tier stowaway that got aboard in the recovery lanes. It happens. It is unfortunate that it happened during the residency of your delusional human, because now the two things are braided together in the crew's mouths, and a delusion braided to a real event is the most durable kind. So we cut the braid. We exterminate the vermin. Quietly, thoroughly, a saturation of the service spaces. It will be finished in a day, and we remove the human to secure care, where his delusion cannot recruit any more of my technicians into believing in ghosts. 2 problems one afternoon. I will need your finding to support the committal. You have already written it, I understand. Good. Confirm it to the panel, and this ends cleanly." Vaughn stood in the bright dome and looked at the old prefect and made a decision that she would understand later to have been the true turning of her whole career, more than any promotion, more than any commendation. "I am withdrawing the finding," she said. The prefect's careful joints went still. "You are what?" "I filed it before I had evidence. I now have evidence. 6 items collected under my own authority which I will lay before the panel. My clinical judgment is that the human is not delusional, that there is a genuine and highly capable apex organism aboard this station, that it has behaved with more restraint in 6 days than any of us could have, and that a saturation extermination of the service spaces would be the single most dangerous act this directorate could commit." She did not raise her voice. She had learned from watching a starved boy across a Kesh board that the strong move was the quiet one. "You want to cut the braid, Prefect. I am telling you the braid is not the problem. The braid is true. Both threads are true. And the thread you want to poison is the thread that has, so far, chosen not to hurt anyone. I would very much prefer it keep choosing that." Prefect Dale looked at her for a long moment in the honest light he had chosen for its power to make people concede. And he did not concede, because he was very old and very good at his work, and he had understood something Vaughn had not yet said aloud. "You have met it," he said. "You have not seen it, no one has seen it, but you have met it in the boy, and it has done to you what it does. You are afraid of it, and you have decided the way to survive being afraid of it is to become its advocate. This is a known pattern, adjudicator. You yourself have a name for it in your own files, I would wager, for when it happens to survivors. It has happened to you." He turned toward the great window of the dome and the gold light and the recovery gardens far below. "I will not poison the service spaces. You are right that it is too dangerous, though not for your reasons. I will not send technicians into the walls after a thing that flattened a Varick. I have read Call's report. Yes, it reached me. Warden's reports still reach me. Whatever you have done with the rest, I will not feed my people into that dark. But neither will I keep a red-tier apex predator aboard a station of 6,000 traumatized souls on the strength of one adjudicator's conversion. So, we will do it correctly. We will do it in the light. He turned back to her. The review proceeds as scheduled. It will rule on the human released, retained, or committed, and it will rule at the same session on the fauna. If a real organism is aboard, then it is a hazard organism aboard a conquered installation without manifest or quarantine, and the directorate is required to authorize its removal. Lethal removal, if it cannot be taken alive, which everything you have brought me suggests it cannot. You will lay your 6 pages before the panel. And when you are done, the panel will do the one thing you are hoping to prevent. It will look at your excellent evidence that there is a real apex predator in the walls, and it will conclude correctly that a real apex predator in the walls must be destroyed. You have not saved the animal, adjudicator. You have written the warrant for it. The only way to save it was to keep insisting it was a delusion. His voice was not unkind, which was the worst of it. But you couldn't do that, could you? Because it isn't one. And you are, whatever else has happened to you these 11 days, still a scientist. Vaughn went to the boy that evening with the whole of it, because she had decided she would not manage him any more, would not adjudicate him, would only tell him the truth and let him decide what to do with it, the way he had been telling her the truth and letting her decide since the first day in the garden. She told him about the review. She told him about Dale. She told him that her own evidence, the evidence that proved him sane, was now the evidence that would condemn Boone, because a proven real red-tier predator aboard a Concord station was, by the Concord's own unbending law, a thing that had to be removed, and that if it could not be caught, and it could not be caught, it would be authorized for lethal removal, which meant sealing the service spaces and flooding them with a nerve agent the boy's animal had no defense against because nothing had a defense against it. That was the point of it, and that this would happen the day after the review unless the review itself found some other road, and that she could not, after 11 days of searching, find the other road. The boy listened to all of it in the sun. When she was done, he was quiet for a while. So the problem, Eli said slowly, is that as long as he's a story I made up, he's safe. And the second he's real, he's a target. He can survive Osvaran and space and your sensors and your war beast, but he can't survive being believed in. He almost smiled. It was the worst thing Vaughn had seen his face do. That's about right. That's about how it's always gone for the two of us. Nobody wants to hurt a ghost. It's the real ones they come after. Eli, I am sorry. I made this worse by trying to make it right. No, he shook his head. You made it honest. Honest was always going to end here. It was going to end here whether you did your job or not, the day one of your people looked in the wrong duct. You just made it end in a room with rules instead of in a duct with a gas line. He looked up at the sun that never set. A room with rules. I can work with a room with rules. I spent 14 years working with a world that had no rules at all. A room's easy. The flat, calm eyes came down and settled on her. Get me into that room, adjudicator. Let me stand in front of your panel. Don't testify for me. Don't testify against me. Just get me in the room and get everyone who matters in the room, the prefect, the warden, your officer, and open the warding dome to the gardens the way it's open every afternoon, and then let me talk. That's all I want. The room, the people, and the dome open. He almost smiled again, and this time it reached. And tell your prefect he was half right. It has done to me what it does. He just doesn't understand yet that it doing what it does to you is the best thing that will ever happen to you. Every single one of us out there learned that the same way. He's about to learn it in a room with rules. Lucky him. The prefect had promised not to send technicians into the walls, and he kept the promise the way careful men keep promises, by finding a thing that was not technically the forbidden thing. He sent drones. Havre Security kept a rack of containment units, squat four-limbed machines meant to corner and net a rioting survivor without hurting him, and on the 9th day, over Vaughn's written objection, and without informing Warden Call, Prefect Dale authorized a soft sweep of the warding service spaces. No gas, no lethality, Only 6 drones with nets and lights and mapping arrays. Sent in to locate, and if possible corner the organism so that the review could proceed with an actual specimen instead of an argument. It was, on paper, the reasonable middle path. Dale was a connoisseur of reasonable middle paths. The drones went in at the maintenance amber hour, when the service spaces were emptiest. Their operators sat in a bright security bay 2 rings away and watched through 6 feeds. And for 11 minutes the feeds showed nothing but ducts and plenums and the slow amber air. And the operators grew bored in the specific way of people who have been told to expect a monster and have found a warehouse. Then the feeds began to go out. Not violently. That was what the operators could never adequately convey afterward in the reports that became, all of them, pages 7 through 12 in an adjudicator's folder. There was no lunge, no seizing, no crunch of metal. The feeds simply ended, one after another, in an order, and this was the detail that made the senior operator stop the sweep and sit back and go very quiet, in an order that made no sense as an animal blundering into machines, and perfect sense as something moving through the service spaces faster than the drones could map them, arriving at each one from the direction the drone was not looking, and putting it out. Feed 4 ended looking at Feed 2's last position. Feed 6 ended looking at nothing, its light angled up, as though it had been turned to face the ceiling and held there. The whole sweep, 6 units, 12 minutes of a station's best containment technology, ended in 90 seconds once it started ending, and the last thing any feed showed was Feed 1, whose light had been left on, pointed down a long straight run of duct, illuminating. Deliberately, the senior operator would insist, deliberately, it had been left on and aimed for us to see the 6 drones arranged. They had been arranged, set in a row along the duct floor, upright, undamaged, their nets undeployed, their power cells removed and set in a neat line beside them. Not broken, disarmed, placed, the way you might set down tools you had decided a child should not be playing with. When the recovery crew finally went in the next shift to retrieve the units, and they went in loud, in numbers, with lights, and found the service spaces as empty and quiet as a held breath, they found one more thing, at the head of the row, that no one entered into any report because no one could think of the column it went in. Someone or something had dragged a maintenance mat into a fold of the plenum and shredded it into bedding, and in the bedding, arranged with the same unhurried care as the drones, were the picked-clean remains of a great many of the station's actual vermin. Because Havre had vermin. Every station did. A low permanent population of duct things and hold things that had come aboard over 3 centuries in 1,000 cargoes, and lived in the walls beyond the reach of every sweep, tolerated because they could not be eliminated, a fact of station life that everyone knew and no one logged. And something had been eliminating them. Systematically, from the moment it came aboard, the thing in the walls had been clearing the walls section by section, of every small living thing that was not itself, and not the boy, hunting the dark it lived in until the dark was empty of everything that might, some night, come up the ducts toward the ward ring, where the one soft thing it had crossed space to guard lay sleeping under a sun that never set. The senior operator did not understand what she was looking at, but Warden Call, when the account reached him, understood it exactly, because it was what his own Varick had been trained to do to a perimeter, and had never once done as thoroughly as this. "It's not hiding in my station," Call said to Vaughn, in the annex where the 3 of them met now, the warden and the recovery officer and the adjudicator, the station's 3 quiet converts. "It's holding my station. There's a difference and none of these people can see it. A thing that's hiding takes food and runs. This thing took food, cleared the approaches, mapped the patrols, disarmed the drones without a scratch, and left them in a row to tell us it could have done worse and chose not to. That's not a frightened stray in the walls." He put his broad-plated hand flat on the table, the same gesture Vaughn had made, as though the 3 of them were all, one by one, feeling for the shape of the same enormous quiet thing. "That's a garrison, Of one. And it's been defending us from our own vermin for 9 days while we've been trying to gas it. Vaughn brought the boy the account of the drones because she had decided he should have all of it, and she watched his face when she described the 6 units set in a row with their power cells beside them. And for the first time since the garden, the boy laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was quiet and it cracked in the middle, and it had 14 years of solitude in it. But it was a laugh, real and helpless and fond. The laugh of a man hearing that someone he loves has done a thing entirely, unmistakably in character. He took the batteries out, Eli said. You have to understand, that's exactly. On the Halloway before the crash when he was young, he'd do that with anything that beeped. Anything with a light and a sound that he decided didn't belong. He'd take it somewhere and take it apart, real careful, never chewed, just disassembled, and leave the pieces where you'd find them like he was filing a complaint. He wiped his eyes. The crew hated it. Chief engineer had a scanner Boone kept relieving him of. And the chief would say that dog thinks he runs this ship, and Boone would sit there and look at him and yeah, he runs the ship. The laugh faded but the fondness stayed, and under it the thing that Vaughn had learned to watch for, the load-bearing thing. He's doing it here. He's found the beeping things that don't belong and he's filing complaints. He's cleaning the ducts. He's adjudicator, he's homemaking. He's decided this is where we live now, and he's making it fit to live in, the only way he knows how, which is to clear it of everything that isn't us and take the batteries out of everything that beeps. His voice thickened. He thinks we're staying. He crossed all that dark, and now he thinks we get to stay. And I have to go into a room tomorrow and stop them from putting gas in the walls. He's been cleaning for me. Vaughn was quiet a moment. The prefect will say, she said carefully, that a thing which disarms 6 security drones in 90 seconds is precisely why it cannot remain. That its restraint is not reassuring but terrifying, because a thing that gentle is a thing that could be that ungentle, and has simply chosen not to be, and that a station cannot stake 6,000 lives on the continued good mood of an apex predator from a world we tag red. He's right, Eli said. Vaughn blinked. He's right that it's a choice, the boy went on. That's the part none of you want to hear because it's scarier than a monster. A monster you can understand. A monster does what it does. Boone chooses every hour, every one of those 6 drones, every time your tech stands 2 meters away shaking, he chooses. He is choosing right now in your walls to be gentle, with a whole station full of strangers who have been trying to hurt him, because being gentle is what keeps me able to stay. That's not less frightening than a monster adjudicator. It's more. Because it means everything he hasn't done, he's decided not to do. Every throat in this station is intact because he decided it should be. He looked at her steadily. So yes, your prefect's right to be afraid. He's just wrong about what to do with the fear. You don't gas the thing that's choosing to be gentle. You find out what it wants, and it turns out what it wants is very small. It wants me to be able to sleep. That's the whole demand. That's the entire threat assessment. Meet that one demand and you will never ever have a problem with Boone. Refuse it, he shrugged, and the shrug was the coldest thing he had done, because it was not a threat, it was just a man declining to lie to her. Refuse it, and you'll find out why 14 years of a red-tier world couldn't. That night, the station's arbitrary night, the dimmed inner ring hours. For the ward domes had none, Officer Toole could not sleep, and she walked the outer ring where the great windows looked at the gas giant's light, and she thought about the sound on the ridge, and she made a decision that had no procedure to authorize it. She went down to the wardring service access, alone, off any order, and she did the thing that 11 days of sensors and drones and gas plans had not done. She sat down on the deck plate outside the sealed junction where Call's Varick had flattened, and she took from her pocket a strip of the raw carnivore stock she had drawn from the galley on her own credit, and she set it on the plate in front of her, and she put her hands open on her knees the way she had seen the boy sit, and she said quietly into the dark in her own voice with the translator off, "I'm the one who took him, on the ridge. That was me on the winch. I'm sorry. I didn't know." She sat there for a long time. Nothing came. The dark stayed dark and the amber air moved slow and the strip of stock sat untouched on the plate, and Toole began to feel the specific foolishness of a grown officer apologizing to a duck, and she began to gather herself to leave. And then, without any sound at all, without a shift in the air she could name, she was no longer alone in the dark. She never saw it. That was the thing she told Vaughn after, the thing she could not get any of them to understand who had not felt it, that she never saw a shape, never heard a step, that the sensors would have shown nothing because there was nothing to show. And yet the certainty arrived in her body complete and total that a great warm attention had come to the edge of the light and was regarding her, weighing her, reading the whole of her the way she had read the boy's face on the ash. She held very still. She did not reach for the stock. She understood in a way that had nothing to do with thought, that reaching would be the wrong move, that the correct move, the only move, was to be exactly what she was, a person who had done a wrong thing and come to say so, and to let herself be read. She was read for a long moment, and then the warm attention decided something about her, and the strip of stock was gone. She did not see it taken. She blinked and it was not there, and in its place, pressed once against the back of her open hand, brief and deliberate and gone before she could turn her hand over, was a warmth, a muzzle. The blunt, warm press of a muzzle against the back of her hand. The way a dog will touch a hand it has decided is not a threat, once, in acknowledgement. And then the dark was only dark again and she was alone. And Officer Toole sat on the deck plate of a Concord station and wept with her hands open on her knees for reasons she would never fully be able to file. The rumor got loose on the 10th day, the way rumors do when an institution decides to keep a thing off the general log, because nothing feeds a whisper like an official silence. It began in the galley and it traveled the ring by the shift change, and by the evening watch it had become, in the mouths of 6,000 frightened beings, a great many things at once. A monster in the walls, a plague on the scrubbers, a human who had smuggled a beast aboard, a directorate that knew and was hiding it. Station Security Director Vess, a Vesk of considerable seniority and no imagination whatever, who had spent the 11 days furious that the warding incidents had been walled off inside an adjudicator's private folder, where his own office could not touch them, took the rumor to Prefect Dale as proof that the soft handling had failed. "Good order is already gone," Vess said in the administrative dome, his scaled crest flat with anger. "You wish to avoid a panic. You have a panic. My officers are fielding 40 reports a shift, half of them of a thing no one has seen, which is worse than a thing they have, because a thing unseen is every survivor's own particular dark wearing new skin. I have a Merit scholar refusing to enter the service corridors. I have a whole dormitory of flood survivors who have barricaded their own hatch against a rumor. This is what your patience has bought, Prefect. Let me end it. One saturation. By the amber hour it is done, and I can tell 6,000 people the walls are clean and they can sleep." Dale let him finish. He had learned in 30 years that a security director who was not allowed to finish became a security director who briefed against you in the corridors. "And when they cannot sleep anyway," Dale said, "because you have told them there was a monster in the walls terrible enough to require a nerve saturation, and they now know their air was one bad seal from carrying it. You will not have ended the fear, Director. You will have confirmed it and given it a smell, and set every survivor on this ring listening at the vents for the next one. The unseen thing frightens them because they do not know its shape. Killing it does not give it a shape. It only proves it was real enough to kill." He turned to the great window and the gold light on the gardens far below. "There is a better ending than a clean wall, and it is a known shape. I would rather give them a shape they can put a hand on than a saturation they will breathe for the rest of their lives." "You would rather," Vess said, and the contempt in it was not quite insubordination, "keep it. You and the adjudicator both. You have caught the human sickness. I have read the pattern in the recovery literature, Prefect. The captive comes to love the thing that holds his mind, and the ones who handle the captive catch it from him. It has a name. It has several, Dale agreed, unbothered. And I have used all of them on other people in this dome across 30 years. And I will tell you the thing none of the literature says, Director, because you are young and angry and it may save you a mistake someday. Sometimes the captive is not sick. Sometimes the thing everyone tells him is a delusion is standing in the walls keeping his air clean, and the only people who can see it are the ones who have let themselves get close enough to be called sick for it. The literature cannot tell the two cases apart from the outside. Only the evidence can. And the evidence, Director, which you have not read because I walled it off, and I am beginning to think I walled it off from the wrong office. The evidence is very bad for your saturation. He let that sit. You will hold. There will be a review in the open in the daylight, with the whole station able to watch, and it will end this the right way, with a shape the frightened ones can look at, and not with a gas they will taste every time they breathe deep for the next 40 years. Post your officers. Answer the reports. Tell the barricaded dormitory that the prefect has seen the evidence himself, and that they are safer tonight than they were a month ago, which is true, and which you will understand when you have read what I should have shown you on the first day. Dismissed. Vess went, stiff with a fury that had nowhere to land, and Dale stood a while longer at the window. Below him, a flood survivor's dormitory was barricaded against a rumor, and a galley crew was passing the whisper hand to hand, and somewhere in the walls of all of it, a tired animal was working its slow perimeter through the dark, clearing the ground of the very thing the frightened ones were most afraid of, and getting, for its trouble, a station that wanted to gas it. The old Ulnavi found that he was no longer certain which of the beings under his roof was behaving with the most reason, and he found, further, that, when he ranked them honestly, the animal came out ahead of the directorate. He had read the adjudicator's folder twice by now, every page of it, and he believed it, which was the part he had not told Vess, and did not intend to. He believed there was a real thing in the walls and that it had hurt no one and cleaned the dark as it went, and he was going to have it killed anyway, on the law in the open, because 30 years had taught him that a station could not be run on the goodwill of a predator, and he did not yet know. He would not know until a dog walked up out of the gardens into the light and lay down at a boy's feet, that he had, for once in a long, careful life, ranked the arithmetic exactly wrong. The boy collapsed on the morning of the review. It was not dramatic, and it was not Boone, and it was not a trick, though Prefect Dale's office would later float all three suggestions. It was simply a body. Eli Marsh had walked out of 14 years on a red-tier world on the strength of a will that had refused, every single day, to be a body that could stop, and a will like that does not switch off cleanly when the danger appears to be over. It keeps the body upright past the point the body can be kept upright, and then, when a bed and a son and 11 days of somebody else standing watch finally convince the will it is allowed to set the weight down, the will sets the weight down all at once, and the body, which has been running on nothing but instruction for a very long time, simply stops taking orders. They found him on the floor of the garden at the 6th hour, conscious, calm, unable to stand. His heart had been doing, the medical officer said, a thing hearts did after prolonged starvation and prolonged cortisol, a thing that was not immediately dangerous and was not to be ignored, and the correct course was rest, monitoring, and above all no acute stress for some days. Postpone the review, Vaughn told the medical officer, and heard the hope in her own voice, and hated it because she knew before the medical officer answered. The prefect has already been consulted, the medical officer said, not meeting her eyes. He notes that the subject is medically cleared to attend in a support chair, that the review concerns the subject's disposition and the disposition cannot wait on the subject's convenience, and that a survivor's collapse on the morning of his own committal review is. The medical officer stopped and finished it because Vaughn was looking at him. Is, in the prefect's words, exactly the kind of event a fixed delusion produces when it feels itself cornered. He has ordered the review to proceed. This afternoon. As scheduled. So it would be this afternoon, and the boy would come to it in a chair, gray-faced, his heart stumbling, and this too the machine would fold into its case against him. See how the delusion unmakes him. See how it cannot bear the light. Better for everyone, most of all for him, that we take the weight of it away and give him rest. And Vaughn stood in the medical bay and understood that Dale was not a cruel man, and that this was worse than if he had been. Because a cruel man could be resisted on the grounds of his cruelty, and Dale was doing all of it out of a genuine and lifelong care for the good order that kept frightened people safe, and would go on doing it, gently, reasonably, all the way to the gas in the walls. She went to the boy's bedside. He was propped up, an oxygen line at his face, and he looked at her over it with the flat, calm eyes gone tired but not afraid. "Bad timing," he said. "Sorry, body picked today to hand in its notice." He almost smiled. "I did the whole thing wrong, you know. 14 years I never let it quit on me once, not through the fever seasons, not through the winter the crawlers came up early. And I get to a bed with clean sheets and a sun that won't set, and the thing I've been holding up finally decides it's safe to fall down. There's a joke in there. I'm too tired to find it." He turned his head. "Is he all right?" "All the drones, the gas talk. Is he all right?" "He is untouched," Vaughn said. "He disarmed 6 of our units without a scratch. He is, by every account, the safest thing on this station. It is the rest of us I am worried about." "He'll feel me being sick." The boy said it with a certainty that raised the hair on Vaughn's neck plates. "That's the thing you should know before the room. He always knows. On the Holloway, before I could feel a fever coming, he'd already be lying closer. Out there, the day I broke my leg on the scree, he was at me before I'd finished falling. He'll know I went down this morning. He'll feel it through whatever it is he feels me through, and it will make him," the boy searched for the word, "less patient. He's been so patient, adjudicator. 11 days of the best behavior a thing like him has in him. And this morning, the one soft thing he came all this way to guard fell down on the floor and couldn't get up, in a place full of strangers, and he's in the walls, and he can feel it." He looked at her steadily over the oxygen line. "Get me to that room fast. Not for the review. Because every hour I'm on a floor being sick is an hour he spends deciding the strangers aren't keeping their end, and there's a point past which his patience is a wall I can't call him back over. I've seen it twice in 14 years. I never want to see it again. Get me in the room, get him to me, and I promise you it stops before it starts. But we're on his clock now, not the prefect's. And his clock is faster." Vaughn assembled them in the hour before the review the way a woman assembles the last pieces of a thing she is not sure will hold. She met Call at the Varick's pen and told him what she needed, and Call, who had spent 19 years being the man whose animal solved the station's crises, agreed at once to bring the Varick to the review chamber and hold it in the antechamber outside, not as a weapon but as a witness. Because if the panel would not believe 6 pages of paper, perhaps it would believe the sight of the station's own apex deterrent choosing, in front of everyone, to lie down. "She won't like the crowd," Call said, running his hand along the great armored neck, "but she'll do it if I ask. She trusts me." He was quiet a moment. "I keep thinking about that. 19 years I've told myself she does what I say because I trained her, but she doesn't lie down in the dark for training. She lay down because something told her to, older than me, older than any of it. I've been so proud of being obeyed, and it turns out the thing I'm proudest of will kneel in a heartbeat to a thing it recognizes." He looked at Vaughn. "The boy's animal. It's not going to hurt her, is it, if they're both there?" "The boy says no," Vaughn said. "The boy says his animal has never once picked a fight with something that lowered its head. He says the only things Boone has ever hurt are the things that reached for him." She paused. "For what it is worth, everything I have seen in 11 days says the boy is the most reliable narrator on this station. It is only the size of what he narrates that we cannot forgive him." She met Toole in the corridor and did not have to say anything, because Toole had come already in her dress recovery grays, with the back of her right hand held slightly apart from her body, as though it were carrying something she did not want to disturb. And Vaughn understood that Whatever had happened to the recovery officer in the service access the night before had made an ally the way a wound makes a scar, permanent and load-bearing. And she went last to Prefect Dale in the bright administrative dome and told him what she intended, that she would lay her 6 pages before the panel, that she would call the warden and the officer, that she would ask the panel to conclude that the organism was real, and then ask it to conclude something the Concord's law did not have a shape for. That a real hazard organism which had, across 11 days and every opportunity, chosen without exception to harm no one, was not a hazard in the meaning of the law but a resident, unmanifested and irregular, and entitled to a resident's disposition rather than a hazard's removal. Dale listened to all of it with his careful hands folded, and when she was done, he did not argue the law because he did not need to. "You will lose on the law," he said, "and you know it, or you would not have dressed it up so. There is no residency category for an apex organism from a red-tier world. There is only the hazard category, and the hazard category has one disposition. You are asking a panel of adjudicators to invent a kindness the code does not contain, on behalf of a thing none of them has seen, against the recommendation of the senior officer present, on the testimony of 3 subordinates who have each, by your own account, had a personal and unverifiable encounter with the thing in the dark. Do you hear it, Reshka? You have caught the delusion and spread it to a warden and a recovery officer, and now you carry it into a review chamber to try to spread it to the panel. That is not a plan. That is the disease looking for more hosts." He rose, and for a moment the old Ulnavi's careful face showed something that was almost sorrow. "I will not stop you. I want that on the record when this is done and examined, that I let the adjudicator make her case in full, in the light, with all her witnesses. Because when the panel rules against you, as it must, I want no one able to say the thing was decided in a corner. We will decide it correctly in the open, and then we will do the correct thing. And the correct thing, Reshka, is a nerve saturation of the service spaces tomorrow at the amber hour, which I have already scheduled, and which the review will confirm rather than initiate. I did not schedule it because I am cruel. I scheduled it because I have run this station for 30 years and I have learned that the humane thing is the thing done quickly, before hope has time to make it worse." He moved toward the dome window and the gold light. "Bring your witnesses. Bring your pages. Bring the warden's poor kneeling beast. And when it is over, go and sit with your human, because he is going to need someone kind beside him when we take the weight away, and you are, whatever else these 11 days have made you, still kind." The review chamber was one of the great ward domes, chosen by Vaughan over the prefect's objection, and granted by the prefect precisely, because he wanted no one to say the thing had been done in the dark. It was the largest bright space on Havre, 40 meters of clear canopy open to the gold enormous light, its floor a curve of pale stone, its far wall not a wall at all but a wide graduated threshold that stepped down, in the afternoons, into the recovery gardens. The threshold that stood open every day so that survivors could pass between the healing room and the growing things, and that stood open now, as Vaughan had asked, letting the garden air and the garden light, and the small sounds of the garden come up into the chamber where a boy's fate and an animal's death were to be decided. The panel was 3, a senior adjudicator named Saravi, gray and exact, a xeno-jurist, the cephalopod scholar Marant of the 9th reading, whose limbs moved in slow consideration through the water of its carriage suit, and Prefect Dale presiding, because a disposition of this weight required the senior officer, and because he had decided he would not delegate the correct thing to anyone who might flinch from it. The chamber filled. Vaughan had not expected the chamber to fill, but word of the thing in the walls had gone through Havre for 11 days the way water goes through sand, and the recovery gardens benches and the dome's tiered stone were lined with station personnel who had come, under one pretext or another, to hear whether the thing they had all half felt was real. Audrey the tech was there in the 3rd tier, her new scales dull, her hands not quite still. the galley steward who had lost 9 kilos of stock, 2 of the drone operators. They had come because a station is a body and a body knows when it has a passenger, and they wanted all of them to be told either that they had imagined it or that they had not. Prefect Dale opened without ceremony. This review concerns the disposition of the recovered person Eli Marsh, human, sole survivor of the Holloway. It concerns, secondarily and by necessity, the disposition of an organism believed to be present aboard this station, without manifest or quarantine. The two matters are joined because the person's account and the organism's presence are joined. I will state the frame plainly so that no one mistakes it. This panel is not here to decide whether the recovered person is a good man, which by all accounts he is, nor whether his account is sincere, which no one doubts. It is here to decide 2 questions of code. First, is the recovered person fit for onward placement, or must he be retained in secure care? Second, is there aboard this station a hazard organism within the meaning of the Sanitation and Containment Code, and if so, what disposition does the code require? He let the words settle in the gold light. I will tell you that I believe I know the answers, and that I find both of them heavy, and that I have opened this chamber to the whole station, and to the daylight precisely so that no one may say the heaviness was hidden. Adjudicator Vaughn, you filed the original finding. You have asked to amend it. Begin. Vaughn rose. She did not go to the speaking stone in the center. She stayed at the edge, near the open threshold and the garden light, and she laid her 6 pages not on the panel's table, but on the pale stone floor where everyone in the tiers could see them, and she spoke to the room rather than the panel, because she had learned from a boy that the strong move is the one that does not announce its strength. 11 days ago I wrote that Eli Marsh suffers a fixed delusion of a companion animal that does not exist. I was wrong, and I am the person best positioned to know I was wrong, because I built the case against my own finding with my own hands. She walked the pages as she spoke them. A sealed cold locker, emptied through a vent no person fits, while the subject lay monitored in a garden. A bulk hauler, the Sen Marrow, that carried persistent hull noise and lost sealed stock across the exact transit from the recovery vector to this station. A maintenance technician who stood 2 meters from an organism that our sensors did not register, and that regarded her, in her words, the way one regards weather. A warden's deterrent animal, Havery's own sanctioned apex, that has fixed on the ward window for 6 days, and that on the 8th, tracked the organism into the service spaces and lay down before it. 6 containment drones, disarmed without a mark and set in a row with their power cells beside them. And beneath all of it, discovered only when we finally went in loud, the picked-clean remains of the station's own vermin, a hidden population 3 centuries old, systematically cleared from the walls, section by section, since the day the organism came aboard. She stopped at the last page. That is not the signature of a monster hiding in my station. It is the signature of a guardian holding it. I do not ask the panel to find that Eli Marsh is sane. I ask it to find that he has been, from the ash of Osverin to this chamber, the single most accurate witness any of us has met, and that the only thing he has ever been wrong about is how long it would take the rest of us to believe him. Senior Adjudicator Saravi studied the pages a long time. You have shown us the effects of a thing, she said. You have not shown us the thing. Effects are consistent with an organism. They are also consistent with a shared expectation among frightened personnel, seeded by a compelling delusional narrative, finding confirmation in ordinary station events, vermin, spoilage, a nervous animal. I do not say that is what happened. I say the code cannot dispose of an organism it has not established exists. Can you produce it? No, Vaughn said. No one can produce it. That is precisely the quality that makes it what it is, but I did not come to produce it. She turned. Warden Call. Call brought the Varick in through the antechamber, and the room drew a breath as one body. It came low, the way it had gone through the whole station since the 8th day, its blunt armored head level, its 6 legs unhurried, 3,000 kilos of the most killed with organism the conquered kept, and the personnel in the lower tiers rose and pressed back against the stone despite themselves, because a body knows a Varric the way it knows a cliff edge, in the legs before the mind. Call walked at its shoulder with his hand on its neck, and brought it to the center of the chamber, near the speaking stone, into the full gold light beneath the open canopy, and there he stopped it, and there he did the thing he had told Vaughn he could do because his animal trusted him. He let go of its neck, and he stepped back and left it standing alone in the center of the chamber, unhandled, unrestrained, the station's sanctioned violence loose in a room full of people, and he said to the panel in the flat voice of a man who has decided to stake his whole life's expertise on one demonstration, "For 19 years I have handled this animal. In that time she has knelt to nothing. Not to me. Handlers are not knelt to, we are obeyed, which is a different thing. She kneels to no one and nothing, because there has been nothing on any station or any world I have taken her to that she has judged her senior." He looked at the open threshold, at the garden light, at the dark shapes of the growing things beyond. The organism the adjudicator describes is somewhere in the walls of this dome. My animal has known where it is since we entered. Watch her. Not me. Her. And then decide whether 6 frightened technicians invented a shared story, or whether the most dangerous thing the conquered owns is about to tell you, in the only language it has, exactly what it thinks is standing in the garden. For a moment the Varric only stood, swinging its head slowly across the tiers, the crowd, the panel, weighing the room the way it weighed every room. Prefect Dale watched it with the patience of a man certain of an outcome. Saravi leaned forward. The cephalopod jurist's limbs went still in their suit. And then the Varric turned its head toward the open threshold and the garden beyond, and it stopped. It stopped the way a struck bell stops when a hand is laid on it, all at once, its whole restless weighing motion gone, and it stood rigid for the length of one breath, too. Its head pointed down into the stepped threshold where the chamber gave onto the growing dark of the gardens. And then in front of the panel, in front of the station, in the full gold light of the dome, the Varric lowered itself. It was not commanded. Call stood 10 feet away with his hands open and empty and did nothing, and the animal folded its forelegs and brought its belly to the pale stone and laid its blunt head flat between its feet and drew its terrible tail in along its flank, and it made itself low and wide and still, and it kept its lowered eyes fixed on the open threshold, and it did not move again. 3,000 kilos of sanctioned apex predator lay down in the center of the review chamber, and made itself small before something in the garden that no instrument in the room could find, and the sound that went through the tiers was not a scream. It was the opposite of a scream. It was the terrible collective silence of 6,000 years of prey instinct, in 40 species at once, all recognizing the same thing in the same instant, that the biggest thing in the room had just told them without a sound that it was not the biggest thing in the room. Into that silence from the antechamber, they wheeled the boy. They had put Eli Marsh in a support chair with a monitor clipped to his chest and an oxygen line at his face, and he was gray, and his hands lay loose in his lap, and he looked, in the great gold light of the dome, smaller than he had ever looked, a young man burned down to rope and bone and stubbornness, wheeled into a chamber of towering careful aliens to argue for the life of a thing none of them could see. He looked at the Varric lying flat in the center of the floor, and something moved across his tired face that was almost tenderness. "You can get up," he said to it quietly, and his translator carried it into the silent dome. "He's not going to test you. You already told him the truth." That's all he wanted to know. The Varric did not get up, but its plated shoulders eased fractionally the way a held breath eases. The boy looked up at the panel. "That's the first honest thing that's happened in this room. Your war beast just told you what I've been telling you for 11 days, and it didn't need 6 pages to do it. It smelled him and it lay down. Everything after this is just you catching up to your own animal." Prefect Dale leaned forward, and when he spoke his voice was gentle and terrible and entirely reasonable. The voice of a man who has watched the ground shift and has already found his footing on the new slope. "You are right," Dale said. "I will concede it now in the open so that no one thinks the panel closed its eyes. The organism is real. My warden's animal has told me so more plainly than any instrument could, and I am too old to pretend I did not understand it. There is an apex predator from a red-tier world loose in the walls of my station." He folded his hands. "And that, Eli Marsh, is precisely why it cannot stay. You have not saved it by proving it real. You have condemned it. A thing that can make that," he gestured without looking at the flattened Varric, "lie down. A thing that disarmed 6 drones in 90 seconds and could as easily have disarmed 6 technicians. A thing my whole station's sensors cannot find. You ask me to keep it aboard among 6,000 souls who have already survived one world trying to kill them, and to stake all of them on your assurance that it will go on choosing to be gentle. I cannot. No responsible officer could. Its restraint is not my comfort. Its restraint is my nightmare, because restraint is a choice, and I cannot run a station on the continued goodwill of a predator. The code is not cruel here. It is wise. A hazard organism that cannot be contained must be removed. I am sorry. I have been sorry since the moment your evidence became too good to deny." He looked for a moment almost kind. "Say goodbye to it well. You will have tonight. At the amber hour we flood the walls. Make your peace." The boy was quiet for a moment. The monitor on his chest beeped its small, unsteady rhythm into the silence. "You keep saying it," Eli said. 11 days and you still can't say his name, because a name would make it a him, and a him you'd have to answer to. So say it. His name is Boone. He's a dog." He looked around the tiered chamber at the frightened faces of 40 species, at Audrey the tech, at the galley steward, at Toole standing by the threshold with the back of her hand held apart from her body. "A dog. You've all been so afraid for 11 days of a thing in the walls, and it's a dog. Some of you don't have the animal. Your worlds never made the bargain we made. So let me tell you what a dog is, since your code doesn't have a page for it. And then I'll ask you for the only thing I've ever asked any of you for." He gathered his breath. It cost him. The monitor stuttered and steadied. "A very long time ago, on the world I come from, a world your catalog would tag red, by the way, a world that would eat most of the people in this room in a season. We just don't advertise it. A very long time ago, something in the dark and something at our fires looked at each other across the light. And instead of doing what everything in the dark did to everything at the fires, the two of them made a deal. No one wrote it down. It's older than writing. The deal was, you take the soft ones into your pack and you stand between them and the dark, and in return they will love you past all sense, past all reason, past death, past their own lives forever. That's the whole contract. That's what a dog is. It's the piece of the death world that came over to our side of the fire and never once, in all the thousands of years since, asked to renegotiate." His voice was steady now, steadier than his heart. "Boone didn't follow me across space because he's a good animal, though he is. He followed me because the deal doesn't have a clause for I got rescued. There's no line in it that says unless a shuttle comes. He decided I was his to keep alive on the 3rd night on Osverin, when the crawlers came for the bodies, and he put me at his back. And there is no force in this galaxy, no distance, no vacuum, no code of yours, that he recognizes as ending that. You call it a hazard. We call it the oldest promise our species ever made or ever kept. And you're going to gas it in the walls tomorrow, because your book doesn't have the page." He looked at Dale, and the flat, calm eyes were wet and did not waver. "So here's what I'm asking, not for me. I'm asking you to let me call him, right now. In the light, in front of everyone, with your kneeling war beast and your whole frightened station watching. Let me call him out of the walls and into this room, and let all of you see the thing you've been so afraid of, and then decide. Not from a report, not from a page, from your own eyes. Look at him and then tell me to my face he's a hazard, and I'll—" His voice caught and he let it. "I'll help you say goodbye to him well. "That's my offer, Prefect. Let me introduce you. And if after you've met him you still want to put gas in his walls, you can do it while I hold him, because I am not going to let him die alone in the dark for the crime of keeping the oldest promise there is." He lifted his gray face to the panel and the gold light. "Do you want to meet him?" The chamber did not breathe. Saravi looked at Dale. The cephalopod jurist's limbs hung motionless in their suit. And Prefect Dale, who had run the station 30 years and had opened this room to the daylight precisely, so that nothing could be hidden, understood that he had been maneuvered, gently, without malice, the way the boy had maneuvered the adjudicator across a cash board to the one square where every choice cost him, and that the only move that did not cost him his own claim to have decided in the open was the move the boy had left him. "Call it," Dale said. "Call him. Let the room see." Eli Marsh turned his chair, with the last of the strength in his ruined arms, toward the open threshold in the garden and the gold light, and he lifted 2 fingers to his mouth, the way he had on the ash, the way Officer Toole had begged Presh to let him, and he whistled a short rising note, and then a second, and the sound was small and it did not echo, and for one heartbeat nothing in the whole bright dome moved. And then at the top of the stepped threshold where the chamber gave onto the gardens, in the full unhidden gold of the light that never set, Boone came up out of the dark. He came without hurry. That was the first thing, the thing that undid the room faster than any lunge could have, the sheer unhurried ordinariness of him. A big cream-colored dog gone gray with ash and travel, a black mask over his blunt face, one ear torn, his coat rough and his ribs showing and his great head low and level, walking up the steps into the light the way a farm dog walks up a porch, without threat, without drama, with the loose, easy roll of an animal entirely at home in its own enormous competence. He was not snarling, he was not crouched. His tongue lolled slightly from the climb. His tail, when he crested the threshold and found the boy across the chamber, moved once, slow, a single low sweep, and the 6,000 years of prey instinct in the tiered chamber understood, in 40 species at once, that they were looking at the most dangerous thing any of them had ever seen precisely because it was wagging its tail. He crossed the pale stone floor. The Varick, lying flat in his path, did not rise, it pressed itself lower, and turned its blunt head away, offering its throat in the oldest gesture of the ranked, and Boone passed it without a glance, the way you pass a thing that has already conceded, and the whole chamber saw the station's apex deferred to like furniture. He walked through the center of the light, past the panel's table, past the 6 pages laid on the stone, and he came to the support chair where the gray young man sat with his hands held open, and he did not leap and he did not fuss. He lowered his great scarred head into the boy's open hands, and the boy bent over him as far as the monitor lines would let him, and pressed his face into the rough gray fur, and the whole dome heard the sound the young man made, which was not triumph and was not fear but was the simple broken sound of a weight set down after 14 years of holding it up. And then Boone turned, unhurried, and lay down across the boy's feet, facing the room, and put his chin on his paws, and watched the panel of adjudicators with the soft, patient, unworried eyes of a thing that had already decided none of them were a problem, and was fully prepared to be proven wrong. A security officer on the 2nd tier brought his weapon up. He was Vesk, young, scaled, posted to the chamber for the panel's protection, and he had watched an unregistered apex predator walk through the center of a sealed room and lie down 10 meters from the presiding prefect. And every instinct his training had built told him to put himself between the thing and the people, and he brought the stun lattice up to his shoulder and sighted it on the great gray shape across the floor, and the whole chamber saw him do it. Boone did not look at him. That was the thing the room could not get past, afterward, the thing that went into the warden's doctrine and the tech's nightmares and the recovery officer's private accounting. That a weapon came up, in a predator's blind quarter, held by a trained officer, and the dog did not so much as turn an ear. He lay across the boy's feet with his chin on his paws and his soft eyes on the panel, and he did not acknowledge the Vesk at all. And after one frozen second, every person in the tiers understood why, and it was worse than any snarl could have been. He did not look because the officer was not a threat that required looking. He had already measured the whole room on the way in. He had already decided, with the flat economy of a thing that had done this arithmetic 10,000 times in the dark, exactly which of the bodies in this chamber could reach the boy before he could reach them. And the answer was none of them. And the young Vesk with the lattice at his shoulder was so far outside the set of things Boone considered relevant that turning to look at him would have been, for the dog, a kind of lie. "Leave it," Eli said. He said it quietly without looking up from the fur, and no one in the chamber ever agreed on who he was talking to, the dog, who had not moved, or the officer, who was shaking. It did not matter. Both of them obeyed. The young Vesk lowered the lattice slowly, his scales gone pale, and stepped back into the tier and sat down hard on the stone, and did not pick the weapon up again. And Boone, who had never looked at him, let out a long, slow breath through his nose and settled a fraction deeper across the boy's feet. And the sound of that breath, small and ordinary and utterly at ease, was the sound of the review ending, though the review would take another hour to admit it. Prefect Dale looked at the dog for a long time. He was not a man who changed course easily, and he did not change it now out of sentiment, because sentiment had never once run his station. He looked at the animal lying in the gold light with its chin on its paws, and at the boy bent over it, and at his own war beast pressed flat and grateful into the stone with its throat still turned away. And he did the calculation he had done 1,000 times, the good order calculation, the 6,000 souls calculation, and he found, to his old and genuine surprise, that the numbers had changed while he was not looking, and that the thing making them change was standing in his environmental division's log. Because the runner had come. Vaughn had sent for it before the review, on a hunch she could not have defended, and it arrived now, carried by a breathless junior from environmental control, and Vaughn read it standing by the open threshold, and then she did not hand it to the panel. She read it to the room. "Havry's air scrubbers," she said, "have been fouling for 4 months. Environmental control has logged it as an unexplained particulate load in the Wardring recyclers, escalating, cause undetermined, projected to reach a mandatory evacuation threshold within 60 days. They have been unable to find the source. I have the logs here." She lifted them. The fouling was biological. A breeding population, not the station's old harmless vermin, but something that came aboard in the recovery lanes 8 months ago and had been multiplying in the walls unchecked in the dark, beyond every sweep faster each month, feeding on the old vermin and then breeding past them, working its way toward the recyclers and the air the entire ward ring breathes. She let it land. 4 months of escalation, and then 11 days ago it stopped. The particulate load did not slow. It stopped. It has fallen every day since, faster than the recyclers alone can account for, and environmental control logged the reversal as anomalous and could not explain it, because environmental control did not know that 11 days ago something came aboard from a red-tier world and began, section by section, hunting the dark of my station clean. She looked at Dale. "Your sensors could not find Boone, Prefect, but your air could. Your recyclers have been writing his biography for 11 days in the only language they have. The thing you convened this panel to exterminate is the only reason this station is not 60 days from evacuation. He did not invade Havry. He arrived at a station that was quietly dying of an infestation none of you could find, and he did what he has done every day of his life, which is to put himself between the soft things and the thing in the dark that was coming for them. And he did it for 6,000 strangers who spent his first 11 days aboard trying to gas him, because the soft thing he loves happened to be sleeping in their walls, and he does not, it turns out, distinguish very carefully between the boy and the boy's whole frightened pack." The chamber was silent, And into the silence, the boy laughed his quiet, cracked laugh once more, and put his hand on the great gray head and said, to no one and everyone, "Yeah, that's the other thing about the deal. Once you're his, everybody you tolerate is his too. You've all been his for 11 days. You just didn't know you'd been adopted." Prefect Asundale rose. "I opened this chamber to the daylight," he said, "so that whatever was decided would be decided where everyone could see it, because I believed I was going to have to do a hard and correct thing and I did not want it done in a corner. I will now do a different thing, and I want it seen just as plainly." He looked at the animal, and at the boy, and at the log in Vaughn's hands. "The code requires that a hazard organism aboard a Concord installation be removed. It defines a hazard organism as one whose presence endangers the installation or its personnel. I have before me an organism whose presence has demonstrably preserved this installation and its personnel from a hazard we could not ourselves find. It is not a hazard within the meaning of the code. It is the remedy the code exists to produce. I find, as presiding officer, that the organism designated Boone is not subject to sanitation disposition." He paused. "And I find that a recovered person who insisted, against every instrument and every authority including my own, on the reality of the thing that has just saved us all, is not delusional, is not unfit, and is certainly not a danger to the good order of settled space. His account was correct in every particular. The failure was ours in lacking the category for it. Adjudicator Vaughn strike the original finding. Enter the amendment. The subject Eli Marsh is certified sound." His careful old eyes went, one more time, to the dog lying in the light. "And cancel the amber hour saturation. Obviously, the station will be informed that the anomaly in the walls has been resolved, which is true, and that it was resolved by a resident, which is also true, and the residents of Haverly may draw whatever conclusions they like about the size and shape of the neighbor who has been quietly keeping their air clean." Something that in a younger Ulnavi might have been a smile moved across the old man's face. "I have run this station for 30 years on the principle that good order is a fragile agreement among frightened people. I find I have been missing a term. Good order is a fragile agreement among frightened people, and the things that decide, for reasons of their own, to stand between those people and the dark. We have had such a thing aboard for 11 days, and I very nearly poisoned it. I am too old to be ashamed for long, but I will be ashamed for exactly as long as it takes to write the new category, and I intend to write it myself. The station did not know how to have a dog, so it did what institutions do with a thing they cannot categorize. It wrote procedures. The first procedure came from the wardens, within a day, because the wardens were the ones who understood what they had watched. Warden Call drafted it, and 3 of his colleagues signed it, and it was entered into the Deterrent Corps Handbook under a heading that would outlast every person in this account, and the heading was the posture of the lowered head. It described, in careful clinical language, the behavior the Corps had observed when a ranked apex organism encountered its senior. The flattening, the turned throat, the stillness. It noted that this posture was not defeat but recognition, and that a handler who saw his animal adopt it should not command the animal out of it, should not attempt to reassert rank, but should himself observe the posture, because the animal was, in that moment, the more accurate instrument. Call added a final line that the review committee tried to strike as unprofessional, and that Call refused to remove, and it stayed. The line was, "Your animal will kneel to the thing worth kneeling to before you will. Let it teach you. Mine did." The Varick, for its part, spent the days after the review trying to be near Boone, in the shy sidelong way of a large proud thing that has met a larger one and been, to its own astonishment, not killed. Call would bring it to the garden in the afternoons, and it would lie at the far edge, throat carefully angled away, and watch the dog sleep in the sun. And slowly, over a week, it moved closer, 1 body length a day, until the afternoon it lay down 6 feet from Boone with a great gusting sigh and put its blunt head on its feet in exact and unconscious imitation. and Call stood at the garden rail and watched his sanctioned deterrent organism learn, at 19, from a farm dog, how to rest. He did not write that one down, some things you keep. The Marines wrote the second procedure, because the Marines had heard about the whistle. They had heard that the boy had called the thing out of the walls with 2 notes, and that it had come and had lain down, and had not needed a single further command through the entire crisis. And this struck the Marine Corps of Havre, a body of hard practical beings from a dozen worlds who fought in squads and lived by signal discipline, as the single most enviable piece of command and control they had ever encountered. They asked the boy to teach it. The boy, still in his support chair but gaining color by the day, told them there was nothing to teach, that Boone had known his whistles since he was a pup on the Halloway, that it was not command. It was just the 2 of them having agreed a long time ago what the sounds meant. The Marines wrote it down anyway. They codified the 2-note recall and the flat hand halt, and the quiet leave it into a signal doctrine they titled, with the total solemnity of people who did not find it funny at all, the small words. The doctrine's preamble held that the most reliable command authority observed aboard the station was exercised not through volume or rank or apparatus, but through the smallest possible signal delivered with total confidence of obedience, and that the Corps should aspire to it. Somewhere in the 3rd section was a subheading, entered without a trace of irony, on the tactical application of the phrase "good boy." Eli, when they showed it to him, read it in the garden with Boone's head in his lap and laughed until the monitor complained, and then he wiped his eyes and said, he'd be so proud. He always thought he ran the ship. Now he's got a doctrine, and he scratched the torn ear, and Boone thumped his tail once against the pale stone, and a passing pair of adjudicators flinched at the sound and then, catching themselves, tried to look as though they had not. Audrey, the tech, came to the garden on the 4th day. She came because she could not stay away, the way you cannot stay away from the edge of the thing that frightened you, until you have looked at it in daylight and made it ordinary. And she stood at the garden rail a long time before Eli noticed her and waved her in. And she came the last few steps the way a person crosses ice, and stopped an arm's length from the dog, and could not make herself closer. He looked at me, she said. Her voice was steadier than it had been in the security bay, but not by much. In the ducts, he looked at me and decided I wasn't anything. I have not slept a full night since. Every time I close my eyes I'm 2 meters away and he's deciding I'm weather. She swallowed. I came to ask you to make it stop. I don't know how you make it stop, but you're the one you're his, so I came to ask. Eli looked at her for a moment, and then he did a thing that made 2 watching orderlies start forward and then freeze. He took the tech's trembling hand, and he laid it flat on the top of Boone's great gray head, and he held it there, and Boone did not stir, did not open his eyes, only breathed his slow, warm breath, and under the tech's palm the huge scarred skull was warm and solid and entirely, boringly alive. He decided you weren't a threat, Eli said quietly. That's what you saw in the ducts, not that you weren't anything, that you weren't a danger. It's the highest thing he can say about a stranger on the first look. This one doesn't need dealing with. You've been carrying it around as the worst night of your life, and it was him paying you the only compliment he's got. He looked at a scared kid who'd stumbled into his den in the dark on a station full of things that had been hunting him, and he decided you were safe, and he went back to sleep 2 meters from you to prove it. That's not weather. He let go of her hand, but the tech left it where it was, on the warm skull, and something in her scaled young face began slowly to come loose. Feel that? He's not even awake. You're standing over an apex predator from a red-tier world with your hand on his head, and he can't be bothered to wake up. That's the safest you have ever been in your life, right now, this second, and your body's finally figured it out. That's why the shaking's stopping. Some part of you just did the same math the Varric did. You're inside the fire now. Nothing gets to you through him. Audrey knelt slowly in the grass with her hand still on the dog's head and did not say anything for a long time, and when she left the garden an hour later she slept, that night, all the way through, for the first time in 11 days, and she was not the last of them to learn that particular arithmetic. Officer Toole requested a transfer. Not away. She requested to be reassigned from the recovery lanes to the ward ring, to the recovered persons division, and when Vaughn asked her why, though Vaughn knew why, Vaughn had watched her come to the review with the back of her hand held apart from her body. The recovery officer took a while to find the words. I pull them off the worlds, Toole said finally, 12 years. I go down onto the worst days of people's lives and I put them on the winch and I bring them up, and then the door closes and they go to the ward and I never see what happens after. I file the recovery and I go back down for the next one. And I always told myself that was the whole job, the bringing up, that the after wasn't mine. She looked at her own hand. I sealed the door on him, on the ash. He was screaming, don't leave him, and I read it as a delusion, and I sealed the door and I did everything right and I was completely wrong. And the only reason it came out all right is that the thing I left behind was better than me at not giving up on people. I don't want to seal any more doors, adjudicator. I want to be on the after side of one for a while. I want to see what happens when you don't leave them behind. She was quiet. And I owe a debt I can't pay to the boy and I can't pay to the dog, so I'm going to pay it to the next ones up the winch on the after side where I can watch. That's the transfer. That's the whole reason. Vaughn approved it, and she wrote in her own log, in the honest white light of the inner ring with the dimmer switched off for good, a private line that was not part of any procedure and that she never showed anyone. I have spent 40 years certifying that recovered persons have come the rest of the way home. I did not understand, until an ash-burned boy and his dog, that some of them come home carrying the death world with them on purpose, because they learned out there the thing we forgot in here, that the world is not made safe by the people who have never been afraid. It is made safe by the ones who went into the dark and made a friend of the thing that lives there and brought it back and taught it our names. Prefect Dale wrote the new category, as he had promised himself. It took him 9 days, which for a statute was fast and for Dale was an eternity, and he consulted the xeno-jurist and the senior adjudicator and twice, in the garden, the boy, though he never admitted the last to the record. What he produced was not long. The Concord's best law never was. It established a disposition class that had not existed in 3 centuries of code, sitting between resident and hazard, and it defined that class by the one quality the whole crisis had turned on, not the organism's capability, which was plainly that of a hazard, but its demonstrated and sustained restraint, its choice, across every opportunity, to preserve rather than to harm. Dale named the class after much argument with a single word that the translators rendered into 40 languages and that would, within a decade, be argued over in courts on worlds that had never heard of Havery. He called it warden, not the job, the condition. An organism that has, by its own choice and against its own capability, elected to stand between a population and the dark, and is therefore owed by that population not removal, but the protection due a member. The statute's preamble was 3 sentences, and Dale wrote and rewrote them for 4 of the 9 days, and they read when he was done. The code has always assumed that safety is a thing installations provide to organisms. This installation was made safe by an organism it tried to destroy. Where an organism chooses to guard those who cannot compel it, the debt runs to the organism, and this directorate will pay it. He entered Boone into the class as its first instance. The registration document required a species designation, and the Environmental Division, which had by then done its analysis, entered the truth. Canis familiaris, origin Earth, human companion animal, domestic. And beside it, in the hazard assessment field that the form demanded, and that no one had the authority to leave blank, an anonymous clerk, no one ever confessed to it, had typed the single most forwarded line in the history of Havery's Records Office, a line that went out with the statute to every conquered installation in settled space, and that more than one alien government took, wrongly and unforgettably, as an official Earth communique. Assessment. Harmless. This is the animal they keep as a pet. There are others, they are not all this gentle. The line was not sanctioned. It was also, Vaughn noted when she saw it, entirely accurate, and she did not order it struck. But the wider Concord, when it heard, reacted the way large, careful institutions react to a thing that frightens them, which is to hold an inquiry. A delegation came, 3 senior officers from the Reach administration, sent to determine how a red-tier apex organism had come to be registered as a protected resident of a Concord station, and whether the officers responsible had been compromised, and whether the human survivor at the center of it represented a security concern that Havery had failed to contain. They arrived in formal robes with formal questions and a formal skepticism, and they were shown, at their insistence, to the garden, so that they might see the hazard organism for themselves and make their assessment. They saw a big gray dog asleep in a patch of afternoon sun, with a young man reading beside it, and a 19-year-old war beast dozing 6 feet away, and a station technician sitting cross-legged in the grass with her hand resting, unthinking, on the dog's flank, and a pair of off-duty Marines quietly arguing over whether the recall whistle worked better rising or falling. And the delegation stood at the rail in their formal robes and their formal skepticism, and watched the most dangerous organism in the sector fail, comprehensively and at length, to do anything more threatening than shift in its sleep to keep the sun on its belly. The senior of the 3, an Ulnavi even older than Dale, watched for a long while. Then she asked to meet the human, and Eli wheeled himself over. He was out of the chair by then for short stretches, but he kept it for the meetings because he had learned that towering officials conceded faster to a seated man, a trick he swore he had learned from the dog, and the old officer looked down at him and asked the question the whole inquiry had come to ask. Why did it follow you? And Eli, who had been asked this by an adjudicator and a prefect and a recovery officer, and had given each of them a true answer shaped to fit what they could hold, looked up at the old Ulnavi in her formal robes and gave her the shortest and truest one of all. Because I'm his, he said. That's it. That's the whole answer. You keep looking for the mechanism and there isn't one. He's not loyal because I fed him or trained him or saved him. Mostly it went the other way. He's loyal because a very long time ago something like him and something like me decided that's what we'd be to each other, and he holds up his end because holding up his end is the entire content of what he is. You want to know why he crossed space. He'd want to know why you think that's a question. I was on one side of it and he was on the other. Of course he crossed. What else would he do? He shrugged, the small, cold, economical shrug. You came a long way to investigate a dog missing his person, ma'am. That's all this ever was. Everything frightening about it is just what it looks like from the outside when a dog loves someone the way dogs love, and the someone happens to be worth a station's air. The old officer looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked at the dog asleep in the sun, and then she did a thing the other 2 delegates found deeply irregular and entered into their report as evidence of local compromise. She thanked him. She thanked the human formally on behalf of the Reach, and she did not entirely seem to know for what, and she left the garden more quietly than she had entered it, and the inquiry's finding, when it was published, adopted Dale's statute rather than overturning it, and added to it only a single recommendation, that Concord recovery doctrine be amended so that no survivor's account of a companion, however impossible, be classed as delusional until the companion had been ruled out by every means including, the recommendation noted dryly, the simple expedient of waiting to see whether it turned up. They offered Eli Marsh a world. It was a good offer, a human resettlement world in the green tier, gentle sky and easy seasons, the kind of place the Concord sent its recovered humans to become people again, and Vaughn brought it to him herself, and told him he was certified sound and free to take it, and that he had earned it more than any recovered person she had processed in 40 years. Eli listened and turned the offer over and looked at the dog and asked one question. "Is it a death world?" "No," Vaughn said. "The opposite. It is one of the gentlest worlds we settle. That is why it is offered. After what you survived, you have earned somewhere that will never try to kill you." "Then no," Eli said, and he said it kindly because he could see it cost her to hear it. "Thank you, I mean that. But no." He put his hand on the great gray head. "Boone doesn't know how to live somewhere that isn't trying to kill us. That's not a flaw, it's the whole shape of him. He's a guardian, and a guardian on a world with nothing to guard against is a good dog with a broken clock, standing watch over a threat that never comes, wearing himself out on nothing. I've seen it, working dogs on soft worlds. They don't do well. They need a dark to stand between me and or they start inventing one." He scratched the torn ear. "And honestly, ma'am, so do I. I spent 14 years being the thing that kept watch while he healed. I don't know how to sit on a porch on a gentle world any more than he does." We'd both just sit there listening for the crawlers. He looked around the bright garden, the ward ring, the station full of frightened people learning to sleep. But this place, a station full of people who got pulled off the worst days of their lives, half of them still listening for a dark that already happened. This place has something to guard. It's got 6,000 people who need to learn what your tech learned, that you can put your hand on the thing that scared you and it'll keep you safe. That's work. That's real work for both of us. He clears the walls and I sit with the ones who can't sleep, and between us maybe we teach a whole station full of survivors the thing it took me 14 years and a dog to learn." He smiled, tired and dry and entirely certain. "Leave us here, adjudicator. Put us to work. We're not recovered persons. We're the after side of the door. Officer Toole already figured it out. Let us do the same job. We're better at it than anyone you've got, and we work for kibble and a warm place in the sun." Vaughn took the offer back to the directorate, and the directorate, which had just invented an entire statute for the dog, found it had no trouble at all inventing a posting for the man. And so the record of Eli Marsh, human, sole survivor of the Halloway, did not end with resettled. It ended in the warding personnel files, under a heading someone had to create for the purpose, with a single line: "Retained by request. Resident Warden, Recovered Persons Division. Companion, Registered Warden Class First Instance." The station learned to have a dog the way people learn anything true, which is slowly and then all at once, and then as though it had always been so. By the second month, Boone had a route. No one assigned it to him. He simply had one, the way he had always had one, the perimeter walk of a guardian checking his ground, and the station's own rhythms rearranged themselves around it without a single procedure being written, because it turned out that 6,000 beings from 40 worlds all knew, in the old part of the body that predates procedure, how to make way for the thing that keeps the dark out. He went the ward ring in the morning while the light came gold through the high canopy, unhurried, nose working, his torn ear cocked, and the recovered persons on the benches learned to expect him, and the ones who had been unable to be touched by an orderly or a medic learned, one by one, to put a hand on the warm gray head of a thing that had chosen them, and to feel the arithmetic settle in their bodies the way it had settled in Audrey's. "I am inside the fire now. Nothing gets to me through him." And to sleep. There was a survivor named Peth, a small quiet Osk pulled off a flooded habitat where she had watched her crew drown one compartment at a time, who had not spoken since her recovery, and sat every day at the same end of the same bench with her back to the same wall, watching the door. The medics had tried everything gentle and everything clever, and she had watched the door. And in the third week Boone, on his route, stopped at her bench and looked at her, and then did a thing he did for no one else. He climbed up onto the bench beside her, which he was not supposed to do, and which put his great gray bulk between the small silent Osk and the door she could not stop watching, and he lay down along the length of her with his head toward the door, taking the watch, and Peth sat rigid for a long moment and then slowly put her hand into the rough fur, and turned her face away from the door for the first time since the flood, because the door was Boone's problem now, and she said to the dog, in a cracked, unused whisper that the orderly across the garden barely caught, "You'll watch it." And the dog sighed and settled, which was yes. And the small Osk closed her eyes against a thing standing guard and slept in the daylight. And when she woke she spoke, first to the dog and then, that evening, to the orderly. And within a season she was on the after side of the door herself, sitting with the newer ones, a warden of the small kind, the human kind, the kind the boy and the dog had come to make. Eli said that was the whole job. He said it to anyone who asked what a resident warden of the recovered persons division actually did, and it embarrassed the directorate, who liked their postings to have deliverables, but it was the truth. He and the dog taught a station full of people who had survived the dark that the dark could be stood between them and something, and that the something did not have to be them, and that a hand laid on a fearsome thing that has chosen you is the oldest medicine there is. Boone claimed the prefect's chair in the 4th month. It was an accident of sunlight. The administrative dome had a particular chair near the great window where the gold light pooled in the afternoon, and it was Prefect Dale's chair. And one afternoon Boone, doing his route through a dome he had decided was part of his ground, found the pool of sun and the chair in the middle of it, and did the only sensible thing, which was to get up into the chair and go to sleep in the sun. An aide found him there and went white and came to the prefect in a panic, and Dale walked down to his own office to find 3,000 years of his species' careful dignity being comprehensively ignored by a snoring dog in his chair, in his sun, and the old Ulnavi stood in the doorway and looked at it for a while. Then he had the aide bring a second chair, and he sat in the second chair in the edge of the sun that the dog had not claimed, and did his afternoon's reading there. And when the aide asked, delicately, whether he wished the animal removed, Dale said no, and then, after a moment, in the dry voice of a man who has made peace with a thing larger than himself, "He was here first. Not the chair. The office. The whole idea of an office. Someone stood between the frightened ones and the dark long before there was a directorate to do it with paperwork. I am sitting in the junior chair, and I find it suits me. Bring my reading." And it became the custom, unspoken, that on gold afternoons the prefect of Havre worked from the second chair, and the first chair held a sleeping dog, and delegations who came to be impressed by the seat of station authority were shown, instead, the sight of the most careful administrator in the sector deferring the sunny chair to a farm dog, and going away having learned the one thing about Havre that mattered, which was who, in the end, it belonged to. The Varick outlived its expected service by years. The warden said it was the resting that did it, that an apex organism run at full readiness its whole life wears out early, and that calls Varick, having learned in its old age from a dog how to lie in the sun 6 feet from a thing it did not have to fear, simply stopped spending itself on vigilance it no longer had to keep alone, and lasted. Call said that was probably the science of it. Privately, Call thought his animal had spent 19 years being the biggest thing on every station, alone at the top of every room, and that being alone at the top is its own slow wound, and that what it healed it was not rest but company, the specific ease of no longer being the one who has to hold the whole dark by itself. He had watched it happen to his animal. He had, he admitted, watched it happen to himself. Officer Toole worked the after side of the door for the rest of her career and never sealed another one, and she kept, on the shelf in her warding quarters, a single strip of dried carnivore stock in a small sealed case, and when the newer officers asked about it, she told them it was a reminder, and did not say of what, and on the anniversary of the review each year she went down to the garden and sat in the grass with her hands open on her knees, and Boone, wherever he was on his route, came and pressed his blunt, warm muzzle once against the back of her open hand, the acknowledgment of a debt that ran, both ways, in a currency neither of them had a word for, and then went on with his rounds, because the ground did not check itself. Rishgavon kept the 6 pages. She was not sentimental about objects, in 40 years of a profession that taught you not to be, but she kept the folder, the sealed locker, the hauler's manifest, the terrified tech's account, the warden's kneeling beast, the row of disarmed drones, the cleared walls, and she kept it not as evidence, because the case was long closed, but as a correction, a thing to take out and read on the days when she felt the old certainty coming back. The certainty of a woman who has read 4,000 files and believes she can no longer be surprised. On those days she read her own first finding, the one that had called a true thing a delusion in careful clinical language, and then she read the 6 pages of a station quietly proving her wrong while she filed each proof away in the dark, and it kept her honest, which was, she had come to think, the only thing worth keeping a scientist. She rewrote the recovery doctrine before she retired. It was her last official act, and it was short, and its central provision was the thing the boy had taught her without ever meaning to teach her anything, that a survivor's account was to be treated as accurate until disproved, not disproved until proven, because the survivors had been where the adjudicators had not, and had learned to see things the instruments could not, and the cost of disbelieving a true survivor was measured in the near loss of the very thing that had kept him alive. She titled the provision plainly, with none of the pseudo-doctrinal weight the Marines and wardens loved, and it read in full, "Believe the one who came back. He has already been right about worse things than you can imagine." That was the whole of it. It hangs now over the intake of the recovered persons division, where every new officer reads it on the first day, and most of them do not know that it was written by a woman who once failed it, about a boy she nearly broke, on the strength of a dog she never fully believed in until it walked out of the walls into the light and lay down at the feet of the person it had crossed the dark to keep. The boy healed in the way of the young, which is to say completely, and as though it had never been in doubt, though it had been in grave doubt. And by the second year Eli Marsh was not a survivor in a chair but a lean, weathered young man who walked the ward ring in the mornings a half-step behind a big gray dog, and who sat in the afternoons in the gold garden with the ones who could not yet sleep, and who was known, across a station of 6,000, simply as the warden and his dog, in a place that had learned to say the word warden and mean something older than any job. He did not talk much about Osveren. When the newer survivors asked, and they asked, because a man who has been to a worse place than yours is a kind of proof that the place can be survived, he told them a little, the cold and the crawlers and the long dark season, but he always turned it in the end to the same place, which was the third night, the night the deal was made. He would tell them how he had thought he was going to die on the third night, and how the dog had put him at its back against the wreck and told him, without words, to be still, and gone out into the dark, and how in the morning there had been no crawlers, and how the dog had come back and lain across his legs and gone to sleep, because its part was done, and now it was his turn to keep the watch. That was the story he told the frightened ones, and it was not about the death world at all, though it sounded like it. It was about the thing he was offering them, which was the same thing that had been offered to him against a wreck on a world that ate survey teams. You can be still now. Something is standing between you and the dark. Sleep, and when you can, take a watch, because that is the arrangement, and it is the oldest and best arrangement there is. And it works. It has always worked. It is the reason any of us are here at all. On an ordinary gold afternoon in the third year, adjudicator Saravi, gray and exact, promoted to Vaughn's old chair, brought a delegation of new officers through the ward ring to show them the division, and stopped them at the rail of the largest garden, the way visitors were always stopped there, because the sight beyond the rail had become the thing Havre showed people when it wanted them to understand what the station was for. Beyond the rail the light came down enormous and unhurried through 40 meters of clear canopy, the light of a station that had promised its frightened sleepers, 3 centuries ago, that here it would never be night. And in the pool of that light in the grass, a lean young man lay on his back with a book open on his chest and his eyes half shut against the gold, and across his feet, pinning them pleasantly to the ground, lay a big cream-colored dog gone gray at the muzzle now as well as the mask, one torn ear, its great scarred head on its paws, sound asleep in the sun. 6 feet away, an old war beast dozed with its throat turned companionably aside. A small Osk who no longer watched the door sat cross-legged nearby, one hand resting in the gray fur, reading. And all around the garden, the recovered persons of 100 catastrophes moved slow and easy in the light, and the orderlies moved softly among them, and no one hurried, and no one was afraid, and the most dangerous organism in the sector slept on a young man's feet with its belly to the sun, and could not have been troubled to lift its head. "That," said Serevi to the new officers, "is a registered warden-class organism, first instance. Origin Earth. Its assessment file, which you will all read, describes it as an apex predator from a world we tag Red Tier, capable of defeating our best containment in under 2 minutes, and of clearing a station's walls of an infestation our instruments could not locate. It is, by any measure the code can apply, the most hazardous thing aboard this installation." She let the new officers look at the sleeping dog for a while, at the young man dozing under his book, at the whole bright, peaceful garden arranged, without a single procedure to enforce it, around one animal's afternoon nap. "Study it well, because your first instinct, reading the file, will be to see the hazard." And a young man who saw only what it truly was got called insane for it, by good and careful officers exactly like you, and was very nearly committed for it, and the thing he loved was very nearly poisoned in the walls it was cleaning for us. Do not make their mistake. Look at what is actually in front of you. She turned from the rail. What is in front of you is a tired dog in the sun who crossed the dark because a boy was on the other side of it, and a station full of people who learned how to sleep because of it, and one line in a records file that an anonymous clerk was never authorized to write and that I have declined 3 times to have struck. She was quiet a moment, looking back at the light. It says, "There are others, and they are not all this gentle." I keep it because it is true, and because it is the only warning the galaxy will ever need about my species, and because it is not, in the end, a warning about our weapons. She began to walk the new officers on toward the wards. "It is a warning about what we love and what will cross the dark to stay with us, and what the dark itself gave up, a very long time ago, to come and sleep at our fires. We did not send soldiers when the galaxy finally met us. We had not gotten around to soldiers. We sent the ones who could not be talked out of loving us, and it turned out that was the thing there was no defense against at all." In the garden the dog slept on, across the feet of the person it had chosen, in the light that would not go out, and did not wake for any of it, because its part was done for now, and the watch at last belonged to someone else.